Chapter 227. The wilderness in winter was still cold even with the mountains blocking the wind and hot springs flowing. The palace and the Central Plains country's negotiations had been going on for several days and had entered the most heated stage. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall escorted the nobles here because the Chanyu princess liked flowers very much. Due to the climate of the wilderness, she could not cultivate them properly. Therefore, she wrote a letter to the Divine Hall to let the flower addict Lu Qinjia come to the palace for a while so that she could learn from her. This had nothing to do with the negotiations, but it started when the negotiations were in a deadlock. Just like the food sent by the girls from the Great River Kingdom, it was a secondary exchange of feelings. Both the barbarians, the Left King's palace and the Central Plains countries did not want the war to continue. The reason for the plundering and the subsequent conflicts was because of the desolate man's return to the south. The former was a problem of resources, the latter was a problem of attitude. The so-called negotiations were just the two sides haggling over the number of troops to be sent and the supply of food. Facing the hundreds of thousands of desolate man who had reappeared after 1,000 years, it was reasonable for both sides to join forces to resist. But who should be in charge of this and who should send more troops? The desolate man were born warriors. In the bloody battle in the north at the beginning of spring, the grassland cavalrymen suffered heavy casualties, which once again proved this almost forgotten theory. If they wanted to stop the desolate man from going south or even drive them back to the extremely cold north, they would have to pay a heavy price. Who would be willing to let their own army be at the forefront? Regarding this matter, the Divine Hall and the Tang Empire both showed a very tough attitude. The army pressed on the long frontier fortress in the north of Yan Kingdom, and the young cultivators of various sects were sent out. The grassland Left King's palace had already been seriously damaged in the war with the desolate man. In the face of such a situation, even if Chanyu wanted to show his toughness, he did not have much confidence. Negotiations depended on who had the stronger spine and who had the more confidence. Once one side was not confident enough and lowered his head, the negotiations would naturally be much smoother. On the second day when Ning Ke and the disciples of Black Ink Garden arrived at the palace, the two sides finally reached a consensus. Before the second wave of fertile grass grew at the turn of the next spring and summer, the Left King's palace would send their main force to the north to attack the desolate man's tribe. As for the Central Plains, they only agreed to send about 6,000 cavalry troops, but promised to give the Left King's palace the most generous financial aid. They also agreed to provide most of the food and armaments that the Left King's palace needed. The news of the successful negotiation was carried by the winter wind and spread across the entire meadow at the fastest speed possible. The cloud-like tents were filled with either enthusiastic cheers or low curses. The royal court tribe began to prepare strong wine and delicacies. Other than that, they also decided to hold an impromptu Gumumu meeting. Gumumu was a barbarian word that meant a joyous gathering. It would only be held during the grandest festival in the grasslands. The royal court had decided to hold a Gumumu gathering at the last minute. Firstly, it was to celebrate the success of the peace talks. Secondly, it was to use this opportunity to allow the people of the royal court tribe to interact with the people of the Central Plains. As for whether this intention could be realized or not, no one knew. The sound of the zither, the horn sounded, and all kinds of colorful banners flew in the wind. People from all over gathered on the meadow. It was extremely lively, especially outside the open area where the competition of horsemanship and archery was held. It was densely packed. The people in leather or cotton-padded jackets did not stand shoulder to shoulder like brothers. They still stood together with their companions and had their own camps. However, this did not stop them from cheering when they saw the wonderful horsemanship performance in the Gumumu meeting. The sheep-catching competition ended and the winning rider received a generous reward. This also made the following archery competition even more exciting. A royal court archer successfully defeated his opponent with his superb archery skills. The arrows on the red target seemed to overlap, causing the crowd to cheer loudly. Ning Ke and the Great River girls stopped in the crowd to watch. No one from the Divine Hall paid attention to the arrival of the Black Ink Garden disciples. They were also free and simply came out of the tent to watch the show. Mo Shanshan stayed in the tent as usual to write. No one tried to persuade her otherwise. Cat Girl looked at the royal court archer who was being carried on the shoulders of a fellow tribesman and snorted in disdain. She tugged at Ning Kei's sleeve and said, "Senior brother, why don't you participate in the competition? Whether it is horsemanship or archery, these people are far worse than you. Why don't you go up and win back all the rewards?" Ning Kei glanced at her and said with a smile, "Of course not." Facing this little girl, he always felt that he was looking at Sang Sang when she was young. Therefore, both his expression and words naturally revealed a sense of closeness. Those who dare to compete in the Gumumu meeting are all the best hunters in the grassland. The archer from the Yen Kingdom is also very powerful. Even if I participate in the competition, how can I win? This was the truth. Whether it was the wilderness or the Central Plains, there were many hidden talents. There was no reason to win. This was also a lie. If Ning Kei had used his full strength, whether it was the sheep-catching competition earlier or the archery competition now, no one present could beat him. Cat Girl looked at him and sighed helplessly. "Senior brother, you are good at everything except for being too humble." Ning Kei could not help but laugh. He thought that whether it was Mo Shanshan or Cat Girl, they always used various ways to praise him directly and sincerely. If he spent too much time with these pure Great River Kingdom girls, he was really worried that one day he would float up to the sky. He rubbed her head affectionately and said, "When you grow up, you will understand that if you always want to be in the limelight, there will be a time when you will be blown by the wind and break your back." The people of the Great River Kingdom were deeply influenced by the Tang Empire. They were persevering, concise, and yearned for victory. They placed great importance on honor and treated it as their lives. Therefore, Cat Girl did not understand why he would say this. Her bright eyes were filled with confusion. During the Gumumu meeting, other than the various competitions and entertainment, the palace tribe also provided many delicacies for the participants. Cat Girl's attention was attracted by the fragrant roasted leg of lamb and she instantly forgot her previous doubts. Zhuajihua and the other Great River Kingdom girls were also attracted by the milk tea and other foreign delicacies that they had never seen before and gradually dispersed into the crowd. After the peace treaty was concluded, it was the season of revelry. At this time, the palace's meadow was undoubtedly the safest place in the world. Ning Kei looked at the curious and eager Great River Kingdom girls in front of the various food stalls and smiled. He was not too worried. The meadow in the distance suddenly became even more lively. Noisy cheers and cheers rose and fell. The winter clouds in the sky seemed to be shaken away by the heat wave. Cat Girl held the large roasted leg of lamb. Her bright eyes were wide open as she looked curiously in that direction. However, she could not see what was happening because of the crowd. The horse racing must have started. Ning Kei took the roasted leg of lamb that she could barely hold in her small hands. He took out a handkerchief and handed it to her, indicating for her to wipe off the oil stain at the corner of her lips. He continued, "The people of the wilderness live as nomads and are best at riding and shooting. Horses are extremely important to them, so horse racing is the most important event of the Gumumu meeting." Cat Girl said excitedly, "Senior brother, I want to go and watch." Ning Kei held the greasy leg of lamb in one hand and Cat Girl's hand in the other as they walked towards the periphery of the crowd. He did not bring her to the edge of the racing meadow. Instead, he walked to a gentle slope outside the tent. The grass on the slope had long turned yellow and lay sparsely on the ground, waiting for the next spring. Although the wind was strong, the view was excellent. They could clearly see the horse racing on the meadow. Because the people from the Central Plains were participating in the Gumumu meeting, the palace paid special attention to it, especially to the horse racing that they were best at. The tribe had specially vacated hundreds of tents just for this, and had enclosed a large piece of land in the middle of the meadow. Horse racing was a competition of speed. It was simple, direct, and exciting. At this moment, the race had already begun. More than 10 majestic horses were galloping on the meadow. The hooves of the horses were like rain, kicking up gravel and dust everywhere. Those with good eyesight would be able to see the muscles under the shining skin of the horses trembling as they exerted their strength. The edge of the empty meadow was surrounded by fences. It was the racetrack. Ning Ke stood on the gentle slope and looked down. With a quick glance, he could tell that they had already run a third of the race. The dozen or so horses had gradually separated into two groups according to their strength. There were 3 horses at the front, leading the charge. Based on the attire of the riders, one could roughly tell that the first 3 horses belonged to the palace, the Divine Hall, and the Tang army. The horse that the Divine Hall riders rode on was snow-white in color. Its 4 hooves were strong and powerful. When it galloped at full speed, it left white afterimages in its wake, as if it was a snowstorm. Ning Ke was different from most soldiers. He had never been a horse lover. However, he had been at the frontier fortress of Wei for many years and naturally knew about horses. He looked at the snow-white horse and could not help but exclaim, "This horse is not bad. If it has a good rider, it will probably only be slightly worse than that silly thing." As he said this, his right hand was still holding up the greasy leg of lamb, which made him look a little funny. Cat Girl was holding a small knife that she had just bought from a herdsman. She was trying to cut off a perfect piece of meat from the leg of lamb. When she heard this, she said unhappily, "How is Big Black silly? Speaking of which, senior brother, you make it carry such heavy things every day, and you don't give it any good food. Even if it becomes silly, it will still be bullied by you." The Big Black that the little girl mentioned was naturally the Big Black horse. To make it convenient for the nobles to watch the race, the racetrack was specially set up in front of the palace tent. A group of nobles stood in front of the tent and watched the intense horse race, smiling as they discussed. In a luxurious corner of the palace tent, Princess Chanyu looked at the quiet girl beside her and said with a smile, "Princess Chenjia, it seems that this horse will not embarrass you." The snow-white horse in front of the field was the mount that Princess Chanyu had given to the girl last night. Today, it was ridden by a cavalryman of Divine Hall, and its performance was indeed extraordinary. The girl smiled and replied, "Thank you, Princess, for your generous gift." The princess looked at the girl's elegant face and thought of her story. Her smile became warmer and warmer. If it was an ordinary horse, how could it be worthy of a love-struck fool like you? "Oh yes, speaking of which, what do you want to name it?" The girl looked at the snow-white horse galloping on the field and felt a little happy. Then she thought of that person's dislike of complicated descriptions. After thinking for a moment, she said softly, "Let's call it Little Snow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 228. In the middle of the fierce horse race, more than 10 fine horses had finished 1/3 of the distance with smoke and dust. In front of the palace knight's yellow buckskin horse and a Tang soldier's jade-spotted horse, was the snow-white fine horse that firmly occupied the first place. Judging from the snow horse's gentle nodding frequency and steady pace, it should still have energy left. It seemed that if the race continued like this, it would undoubtedly be the first to cross the finish line. However, at this moment, a burst of surprised and shocked shouts rang out from the beginning of the racetrack. Countless people cried out in surprise, not knowing what they had seen. Ning Ke and Cat Girl looked in the direction of the sound and saw a pure black horse rushing onto the track. It was like an arrow leaving the bow, chasing the horses in front at a terrifying speed. The horse race had already started. No one knew where the big black horse came from. There was no one on the horse and no master to control it. No one knew why it ran onto the track. Ning Ke looked at the big black horse and opened his mouth slightly, but he did not know what to say. Cat Girl rubbed her eyes with the back of her fingers and said curiously, "I seem to have seen this horse somewhere." The big black horse seemed to have been stimulated by the horse races on the grassland. After it rushed onto the track, it ran faster and faster without the whips and kicks of the jockeys. Its 4 powerful hooves quickly kicked on the slightly hard ground, kicking up black flowers one after another. Its body gradually dragged out a black shadow. The onlookers looked at the terrifyingly fast big black horse and could not help but be dumbfounded and shocked. They did not know that there was a horse that could run so fast in the world. In the dense crowd, as the big black horse's hoofbeats passed by, there was a wave of exclamations. The people who participated in the Gumumu gathering all knew some riding skills. Although the weight of the horse was lighter without a rider on its back, without the rider's command, the horse did not know how to allocate its strength. Moreover, it lacked the stimulation of pain during the final sprint. Therefore, although people were shocked by the speed of the big black horse, they still did not think it could catch up with the horses in front, not to mention that the horses in front had already run a long distance. Based on this idea, although the people along the way were still amazed by the sudden appearance of the big black horse and its amazing speed, those who were concerned about the outcome of the horse race had already turned their attention to the front. The palace had prepared a large field for this horse race. Since the journey was far away, the distance between the horses was widening due to the difference in strength. The two horses of the palace and the Tang army were still struggling to catch up with the white horse in front, but it was obvious that it was impossible for them to catch up. Entering the wilderness to negotiate with Chanyu of the left king's palace was of great importance. For this matter, the Tang Empire specially sent General Shu Qingshu from the military ministry to take charge of this matter. At this time, the general who came from afar stood in front of the king's tent, watching the situation of the horse race in the wilderness. He listened to the conversation between the priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall and Chanyu, and his expression seemed a little gloomy. The elites of the Iron Cavalry sweep across the world by relying on their battle prowess. It's not like the fastest runner is the best. General Shu thought so in his heart, but he watched helplessly as the horses of the Tang army had no hope of winning, and were even left further and further behind by the white horse. Thinking that the white horse was a gift from the palace to the Divine Hall, how could he be reconciled to it? When the bigwigs in front of the king's tent were all focused on the three horses in the front, on the wilderness, exclamations and cheers came from afar like real waves, getting closer and closer. Chanyu and the priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall, who were talking enthusiastically, were slightly startled. They raised their eyes to look into the distance, wondering what was happening over there. General Shu was no exception, and his brows gradually furrowed. They had already heard the exclamations and cheers before, but they did not expect that it had something to do with the horse race. The wave-like exclamations and cheers were naturally related to the big black horse. When it violently swept past people like a gust of wind, people only had time to exclaim in surprise. The wave-like exclamations and cheers spread faster and faster, which meant that it was running faster and faster, and was about to catch up with the horses in front. People's initial thoughts were not wrong. A horse without a master would not know how to allocate its strength in a long-distance race. However, the reason that overturned people's judgment was very simple, because the big black horse did not need to allocate its strength at all. Its strong body seemed to contain endless power, so why would it conserve its strength? Under the sunlight of the wilderness, the big black horse's skin was incomparably dark, emitting a charming luster. As it madly sprinted, its muscles tightened and relaxed at a high speed, as if they were trembling. The terrifying speed made the hoof shadow under its body almost invisible to the naked eye, and it easily overtook the horse in the back. One should know that the horse in front had already run a third of the way before the big black horse sneaked onto the track from the starting hurdle. However, it had actually caught up with them before they reached the finish line. This kind of speed really made people unable to believe their eyes. The big black horse continued sprinting madly, overtaking the second horse, the third horse, without any pause or hesitation. Its reddish eyes could not see its own kind at all, and only knew to keep overtaking and moving forward. The people participating in the Gumumu meeting in the wilderness were shocked speechless by the scene before them. They could only subconsciously stretch out their hands to hold their heads, and let out exclamations of excitement. Some of the herdsmen even began to suspect that the big black horse was the legendary Pegasus, otherwise how could it run so fast? No one knew where the big black horse came from, or who it belonged to, but they were deeply shocked by the power and speed it displayed, especially when they saw it surpass the other horses with an indomitable momentum. Everyone's blood was ignited by this black shadow, and they began to crazily cheer for it. The big black horse overtook the jade-spotted horse of the Tang army. The big black horse overtook the palace's yellow buckskin horse. Just when everyone present, including the bigwigs in front of the king's tent, were shocked speechless, the big black horse continued to shock the wilderness. It unstoppably caught up to the divine hall's snow-white steed. The white horse was astonishingly fast, like a silver dragon, while the big black horse was like a violent black sandstorm, trying to drown the silver dragon in front of it. In a corner of the king's tent, the Chanyu princess could not hide her shock, and reached out to cover her mouth. In order to choose a gift for the flower addict, Lu Qinjia, the palace tribe had chosen for a long time before they finally picked out a snow-white horse without any impurities, and it was extraordinarily handsome. She did not expect it to be challenged at this time. Lu Qinjia, the princess of Yueluan Kingdom, who had been sitting quietly and looking at the pot of snow lotus beside her, was attracted by the commotion outside and the expression of the princess. She turned her head to look at the wilderness, and her slender eyebrows slightly raised. The knight of the divine hall on the back of the white horse heard the hoofbeats behind him getting clearer and clearer. Based on his years of experience, he knew that his opponent was catching up. He looked back and was shocked by the huge black horse's head. This was because the eyes of this strange big black horse were too strange. The bright eyes were filled with madness and violent emotions, and there were a few streaks of blood. It looked as if it wanted to bite him to death. In fact, the big black horse really opened its mouth, showing its white teeth, and bit the air as if it was crazy. After all, the speed was too fast, and the big black horse could not bite the white horse's swaying tail in the air. It stared at the white horse's buttocks with hatred, and the speed of its 4 hooves on the ground increased, and instantly surpassed the white horse's buttocks. The onlookers in the wilderness let out a deafening cheer. The knight of the divine hall on the white horse was shocked. His body bent forward, and his right hand that was holding the horsewhip tightened. He knew that the white horse under him was a gift from the palace to the noblewoman. It was already a great honor for him to be riding on her behalf. If he lost today, it would be a terrible ending. Since the beginning of the race, the knight of the divine hall had only waved the horsewhip twice in the air, and not once on the white horse. That was because he did not have the guts to leave a bloody mark on the noblewoman's horse. However, the situation was so tense, and the big black horse that appeared out of nowhere seemed to have the ability to surpass him. He made up his mind and was ready to whip the horse's buttocks. At this moment, no one expected that after the big white horse noticed the big black horse, it seemed to be greatly stimulated. It did not even need the knight to whip it, and suddenly began to speed up. It was only then that the people in the wilderness realized that the snow-white horse had not exerted its full speed. That was why it looked so graceful and stable before. Now, it was stimulated by the big black horse, and finally began to display all its abilities. It was no longer graceful, and actually began to run extremely crazily. A white snowstorm had officially begun. And the black shadow followed closely behind, not willing to fall behind at all. The cheers and shouts of surprise in the wilderness reached their climax at this moment. The winter clouds drifting in the sky dispersed one by one. Between the heaven and earth, there was a clear light. Visibility was very clear. The big white horse and the big black horse were almost neck and neck, but the white horse was half a body length ahead. At this time, both of them were sprinting with all their might, madly kicking their hooves and swinging their heads. They did not care about running elegantly, and they were running crazily. The relative speed between the two seemed to be extremely slow, or even about to stop. The finish line was not far ahead. The spectators in the wilderness gradually had a feeling that the big black horse could never surpass it. Many of them felt extremely regretful and sighed in their hearts. The big black horse did not have time to sigh. Since it was born, it had stayed in the military camp on the north side of the Tang Empire and in the horse farm outside Chang'an. It had bullied countless of its own kind and countless humans, but it had only been bullied by one human. It was the first time for it to run desperately like today, and it was the first time for it to breathe so heavily. Everyone thought that it could not surpass the white horse in front of it, but it was not convinced, unwilling to accept its fate. It squeezed out all the strength in its body, burned all the desire, and still sped up in the impossible. The tips of its hooves stepped on the black soil, and it caught up with the white horse inch by inch, like the shadow of the night attacking the earth. The horse's hooves broke the black soil, and the night shadow swallowed the wind and snow. Just before the finish line, it finally succeeded in surpassing the white horse and was the first to rush over. There was a silence in the wilderness, and then there was deafening cheers. The bigwigs in front of the king's tent were silent, and then there were countless exclamations. Some sharp-eyed powerhouses even noticed that just before it rushed over the finish line, the big black horse still had the strength to look back at the white horse mockingly. At the same time, it flipped its thick lips at high speed, looking extremely disdainful. General Shu of the Tang Empire looked at the big black horse in a daze and murmured, "I seem to have seen this horse somewhere." The chief figure of the Divine Hall who participated in the negotiation of the palace was the priest of the Revelation Department. He looked at the group of horses rushing over the finish line, frowned, and glanced at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall beside him. The gaze of the priest of the Revelation Department was very indifferent, very cold. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall felt very cold, very cold. He knew the hidden meaning in the priest's indifferent gaze, because the cavalryman of Divine Hall who rode on the white horse was the best knight he had specially selected in advance. However, riding on Princess Chinjia's horse, he inexplicably lost to a big black horse that came out of nowhere, and in such a way. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall were under the jurisdiction of the Judicial Department, not directly under the Revelation Department. But the priest was a person of high status, and if Princess Chinjia was displeased because of this, how would Prince Longqing deal with him? The more the commander thought about it, the more scared he became. He stared at the big black horse that was panting in the field, and thought to himself, where did this beast come from? I will definitely kill it after this. Which tribe does this big black horse belong to? Standing at the forefront, Chanyu of the left king's palace looked at the dark and shiny steed under the sun, and his heart was filled with infinite love. He waved his hand and said, "Go and ask. I want it. I can exchange anything for it." There was some distance between the gentle slope and the grassland, but Ning Ke had no reason not to recognize his silly horse, especially when the big black horse turned its head and glanced at him before crossing the finishing line, and rolled its thick lips. It was unique. He thought speechlessly, what's wrong with this guy today? It actually wanted to race with others, which was completely inconsistent with its usual laziness. Halfway through, Cat Girl had confirmed that the big black horse was the horse of her senior brother beside her. At this time, seeing that the big black horse had won the ultimate incredible victory, she excitedly jumped on the gentle slope and clapped her hands. She grabbed Ning Ke's sleeves and kept shaking, and said excitedly, "Senior brother, look, big black one." Ning Ke sighed and said, "This guy really likes to be in the limelight. Why is he not like me at all?" Cat Girl's excitement was disturbed by his sigh, and she pouted and said, "I just don't understand. What's wrong with being in the limelight? You should know that victory is the greatest honor." Ning Ke did not answer the little girl, and thought helplessly in his heart, "Big black horse is so arrogant in public, what if someone recognizes him? I was still hesitating about when to reveal my identity, and now I'm forced to be led by a horse? But shouldn't he be leading the horse?" The intense horse race made the hearts of all the people attending the Gumumu meeting beat faster, and they forgot everything around them. Cat Girl, who knew the origin of the big black horse, was even more nervous. The leg of lamb that she had received from Ning Ke was nowhere to be found, and her hands were empty with the mutton fat and fragrance. She carefully wiped her hands with a handkerchief, and thought for a while, and said to Ning Ke, "Senior brother, your handkerchief is dirty. I'll wash it and return it to you, okay?" Ning Ke smiled and took the handkerchief directly, and said, "I know how to do this kind of thing." Everything on him and in his bag was prepared by Sang Sang before he left, so he had been very careful. If he lost the handkerchief in the wilderness, he was worried that he would not be able to explain it to his family in Chang'an. Cat Girl's words had no other meaning, and she did not know what Ning Kai was thinking at this time. Looking at the big black horse in the wilderness, she happily waved and said with a smile, "Senior brother, don't be fooled by the fact that you don't feed big black horse and enslave it every day, but it will shine when it needs to shine. If you don't treat it well, it will be taken away by someone in the future, and it won't miss you. Don't regret it then." Hearing this, Ning Kai could not help but think of a busy, skinny back and a dark face. His heart could not help but shrink. As the heavenly cat girl looked down, his heart could not help but shrink. In shock, he held the heavenly cat girl in his arms as fast as he could and covered her eyes with his hands. In the wilderness, the horses that had rushed past the finish line were all panting heavily, kicking their front hooves from time to recover their strength according to their familiar method. The riders on the horses were also helped to rest. The big black horse's strength recovered extremely quickly, and it only took a short time for it to be as energetic as before. More than a dozen people from the palace surrounded it, looking at it curiously and asking around who its master was. The big black horse seemed to enjoy the feeling of being the center of attention. It gently shook its head and looked extremely proud. From time to time, it stuck out its long red tongue and licked its thick lips. Not far away, the snow-white horse was panting violently, being led by a knight of the divine hall to walk slowly to the side. Seeing the big black horse rolling its tongue and licking its lips, there was hatred in its eyes. The big black horse happened to see this scene, and was greatly stimulated by Ning Kai's death threat. It crazily pushed away the people around it and rushed toward the white horse. The white horse was also a talented horse, but it had never seen such a thick-skinned and abnormally strong horse like the big black horse. It wanted to kick back to defend itself, but it was too weak to resist. The big black horse bit the back of the white horse's neck. It did not bleed, but it did not hold back its teeth. The white horse let out a sad cry. The big black horse bit the white horse's mane and put its front hooves on it. Its strong body pressed on the white horse unreasonably. Looking at it, anyone could guess what it would do next. There was a burst of laughter from all around. The princess looked extremely embarrassed. She stood up and scolded her subordinates to quickly separate the two horses. Lu Chenjia looked there quietly, her expression still as pure as an orchid that had just bloomed. However, her hands and her sleeves gradually clenched. Suddenly, there was a sharp whistle from afar. The big black horse seemed to have heard the soul-sucking bell. It shivered all over and got off the horse. It knocked away the people around it who wanted to restrain it, and like a black flash, it rushed out of the camp and began to run crazily again. As it ran, it thought proudly, "I only ate a meal from your trough last night. White horse, you bitch, how dare you call a bunch of sisters to deal with me? Do you really think I can't deal with you?" The cold wind was like a knife. The big black horse was full of heroism, and its hooves were dancing. "If I don't have some craziness, I really can't win anything. There is still one day left. I thought I would be too lazy to ask for votes before the completion of the 10,000 words in 7 days, but I realized that the last step was too hard. I have lost all my heroism, and I am already a scum. Brothers and sisters, if you have recommendation votes or monthly votes, please throw them to me and stimulate me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 229. Ignoring the bustle in the wilderness, Ning Kai returned to the camp with Cat Girl. He lifted the curtain and walked into the tent. He glanced at the luggage piled in the corner and looked at Mo Shanshan, who was concentrating on writing calligraphy. He asked, "Wasn't my black horse tied outside the tent? Why did it slip out?" Mo Shanshan put down the brush in her hand and looked back at him. She explained expressionlessly, "You tied it up after it came back in the morning. After you left, I was the only one left in the tent. It kept barking and kicking its hooves. It looked like it wanted to go out to play, so I untied the rope and let it play on its own. Ning Ke looked at her and didn't know what to say. He scratched his head and said, "You let it go when it wanted to go out. Why does this sound wrong? It's a horse, not a human. The big black horse is very intelligent. I can understand what it wants to say." After saying this, Mo Shanshan didn't want to explain more about this matter. She turned around and picked up the brush on the inkstone, ready to continue copying. Cat Girl ran to her excitedly and said, "Senior sister, you are right. The big black horse is more than intelligent. It's so powerful. Do you know that many people are chasing after it?" Mo Shanshan slightly raised her black eyebrows and asked, "What happened?" Cat Girl carefully told the process of the big black horse's appearance and winning the horse race. Then she said, "As for what happened in the end, senior brother covered my eyes, so I didn't see it." Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Quebec. Ning Ke wondered how he should describe that scene. He raised his hand to cover his mouth and coughed twice. He pretended not to see Mo Shanshan's gaze and walked out of the tent. Standing on the slightly hard winter wilderness and looking at the fluttering flag of the Tang army and the heavily guarded camp not far from the west, he began to think about other problems. Where should he start to find the head of the horse gang? As the representative of the Tang Empire in this negotiation, General Xu Qing brought his trusted subordinates and traveled thousands of miles from Chang'an to this place. The safety of the 300 elite cavalrymen of the Northeast Border Military was in charge of the security. Banners fluttered in the wind and the occasional neighing of horses could be heard. The tents were arranged in an orderly manner and the Tang camp was densely packed. In the tent in the center of the Tang camp, General Xu Qing took off his helmet and carelessly stroked his gray hair. He sat behind the table and signaled his subordinates to prepare some food. He drank a lot in the king's tent, but he could not eat his fill. General Xu held his fork and food as he ate, remaining silent. The subordinate next to him noticed that the general was deep in thought. He thought that the general was in a bad mood after hearing some gossip about today's horse race. After thinking for a while, he comforted, "General, our cavalry is good at fighting. We are really not good at this kind of pure racing. If we lost, we lost. If that old aunt wants to gossip, no one can stop her. That old woman doesn't know shit." General Xu said mockingly. As a general of the Tang Empire, he had to be careful with his words when he respected Quni Madi as the sister of the Yueluan Kingdom's king. But in this private military tent, he was not in the mood to give that aunt any face. Seeing that the general was really not upset about this matter, the subordinate thought of another matter. He glanced at the patrolling soldiers outside the tent and asked in a low voice, "General, are you worried about Tiang City?" In the summer, the imperial court confirmed that the matter of assisting the Northern Yan expedition would be presided over by the Tang Empire's Eastern Army General Xiahou. But no one would have thought that when the Central Plains began to negotiate with the grassland barbarians, His Majesty had already ordered the military ministry to intervene in this matter. Although General Xu Qing came to the palace on imperial orders, it inevitably angered the border military. When he passed by Tuyang City, General Xiahou used the excuse of patrolling the border and did not even want to see him. "If I were General Xiahou, I would not be happy either." General Xu Qing smiled slightly and put down the chopsticks in his hand. He took the towel and wiped his face casually. He said, "Don't guess blindly. I am indeed thinking about something, but it has nothing to do with the two things you guessed." The subordinate frowned slightly and thought that the two sides had reached an agreement. The next thing to do was to discuss the northern expedition next year with the Central Plains Coalition Army and the specific matters of assisting the Lieutenant Palace. Everything would be done naturally. If the general was not upset about losing the horse race and not worried about the anger of Tiang City, then what was he thinking about? "I am thinking about the big black horse," General Xu Qing said with a smile. The subordinate suddenly understood and thought that he finally understood the general's thoughts. After a moment of thought, he said, "Chan Yu seems to be very interested in that fine horse. But since the general likes it, I will think of some ways to inform the steward of the king's tent later. I believe that Chan Yu will not be stingy with the horse to show his closeness to the Tang Empire." General Xu Qing looked at the subordinate and sighed helplessly. He scolded, "I don't know what is going on in your head. I don't want the big black horse. If Chanyu wants the horse, he will only get into trouble in the end." Looking at the confused expression on the subordinate's face, the general shook his head and looked at the blue sky outside the tent. He frowned slightly and said, "When I saw the big black horse today, I felt that it was a little familiar. I always felt that I had seen it somewhere before." General Xu Qing threw the towel on the table and said with a reminiscing expression, "At that moment, I just remembered that I had seen the big black horse in the driving examination last spring when I represented the military ministry to inspect the academy entrance examination of the academy." The subordinate was stunned. He thought of the black lightning running in the wilderness and the violent black storm. He thought that the incredible horse actually came from the Tang Empire. You also saw how hot-tempered the big black horse was. During the academy entrance examination last spring, all the candidates who were chosen to ride the big black horse fell off, including the daughter of General Yunhui. I was patrolling above the meadow at that time and thought that no one could tame the horse. Then I saw a lad walk into the stud field. General Xu Qing squinted slightly and recalled the scene at that time. He said slowly, "The big black horse suddenly became very obedient in front of the lad. I thought it was a little strange at that time, but when the lad's name shook Chang and city, I realized that the warhorse was actually very intelligent. It actually knew the lad's power before anyone else." The subordinate asked curiously, "Who is that lad?" The general withdrew his gaze and looked at him. He said, "Ning Quebec Ning K." The subordinate murmured. Suddenly he looked shocked and said in surprise, "Are you talking about Sir Ning, who shocked Chang and with a piece of paper?" "I don't like to play with words." General Xu sighed and said, "I only know that Ning K entered the academy last year and entered the second floor this year. He has become a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. I also know that when Ning K left Chang and city, the stud field in the suburbs specially sent this big black horse to him." The subordinate asked, "Then, why did this big black horse appear in the palace?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he knew that he had asked a very stupid question. Such an unparalleled horse would naturally not be too far away from its master. If the horse was in the palace, it would naturally be in the palace. Ordinary people don't know that Ning K is ranked 13th on the second floor of the academy. But of course the military ministry knows that he used the name of Mr. 13 and stayed at the frontier fortress of north of Yan Kingdom. But even I did not expect him to personally come to the palace. General Xu frowned slightly and said to himself in a low voice, "Even the academy attaches so much importance to this peace conference. Are the desolate men in the north really so troublesome? Or is there another secret about this matter?" The subordinate thought for a moment and asked puzzledly, "General, since Ning K has come to the palace, why did he not show himself or come to the camp to meet you?" General Xu was silent for a moment and said with a smile, "What kind of person is the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy? He must have his reasons for not showing himself. I probably don't have that much influence. I just feel that this matter is getting more and more interesting." Dusk fell. The bonfire was lit and the sheep were hung upside down. As the aroma of wine filled the air, night fell upon the wilderness. People from all over the world gathered in the palace tribe. There were also many herdsmen from the surrounding tribes who had specially come to participate in the Gumumu gathering. Under the light of the fire and the aroma of wine, people excitedly discussed the scenes they had seen during the day. They argued about which warriors were the most powerful and whose archery skills were the best. Of course, the one that was most mentioned was the violent black horse. Countless people were guessing who its owner was. The owner of the big black horse did not hear the excited discussions of the people. He did not enjoy the wine and meat. Instead, he stole the clothes of a herdsman from the grassland. Under the cover of the night, he snuck west from the great river camp and approached the Tang camp silently. He then turned south and sat down behind a high ground. After some time, a figure approached from the direction of the Tang camp. From his speed and body shape, it could be seen that this person was extremely cautious and vigilant. I've never understood. How can you be so sure that it's one of our people coming by drawing a picture with a wooden stick outside the camp? What if it's just a random drawing by the children on the grassland? Ning Ke looked at the man and said. Although there was no fire behind the meadow, he could still vaguely make out the man's face and attire under the starry sky. He looked like an honest Tang cavalryman. The Tang soldier did not answer his question. His eyes were filled with suspicion, as if he did not understand why this fellow would have the leisure to say such nonsense under such circumstances. Ning Ke stretched out his hand, and the Tang soldier stretched out his hand as well. They seemed to be shaking hands, but with a light snap, the two waist tokens were gently put together, exactly the same. With the help of the starlight, the Tang soldier clearly saw the lines on Ning Ke's waist token. His expression suddenly changed, and he hurriedly saluted with hands folded in front. He lowered his voice and said respectfully, I didn't expect His Excellency to come in person. You don't know who I am. How do you know that I'm His Excellency? Ning Ke asked with a smile. The Tang soldier's honest face revealed a simple and honest smile. He said, it's written clearly on the waist token that His Excellency is a visiting professor of the administration. Of course, he's my Excellency. Ning Ke glanced at the man and asked in surprise, the Imperial Center Administration is a government office for cultivation. But I don't see any fluctuation of psyche power on you. Have you entered the see-through state? If I were a powerhouse in the see-through state, I wouldn't have to go through so much trouble to follow you to the wilderness. The Tang soldier laughed and explained, although the Imperial Center Administration is responsible for managing cultivators, not all the staff are cultivators. There are more ordinary people like me. The reason why Ning Ke left the Blue Water Battalion and went deep into the wilderness was because of the message sent by the Nation Master Li Qingshan through the Imperial Center Administration. The Imperial Center Administration would certainly find a way to leave an informant for him near the palace if they wanted to cooperate with him. He looked at the man and said, let's cut to the chase. Let's get down to business. The Tang soldier answered with a simple and honest smile, if His Excellency wants to chat, we can chat. If he wants to get down to business, we can get down to business. Ning Ke was slightly startled. He smiled and thought that the man was indeed a member of the Imperial Center Administration. He probably had too much contact with those arrogant cultivators, so he didn't have the usual respect and awe ordinary people had for cultivators. But his words and actions were so smooth and free. This kind of attitude was really good to use to deal with cultivators. He asked directly, do you know my task this time? The Tang soldier answered honestly, no. Ning Ke nodded and said, that's good. Because what I want to ask has nothing to do with the task. This time it was the Tang soldier's turn to be startled. His honest face showed an expression of admiration. He thought that Ning Ke was indeed a distinguished visiting professor of the Imperial Center Administration. He could make such a shameless request of using the power of the Imperial Court for his personal affairs so naturally. Ning Ke continued to ask, how many people are there in the Tang battalion? About 500 people, including cavalrymen and some handymen. Ning Ke looked at the Tang battalion with fluttering flags and dense tents. He frowned and said, it seems that there are more people in the camp. The Tang soldier explained, one person rides 3 horses, so we need more space. How well do you know the situation in the camp? Ning Ke asked casually. He thought that there were hundreds of cavalrymen in the Tang battalion, and the man was just an ordinary cavalryman. How could he know everything? However, he did not expect that this Tang cavalryman was a spy placed in the northeast border military by the Imperial Center Administration. What he did every day was to observe any movement in the Tang battalion. So when he heard Ning Ke's question, he nodded without hesitation and answered, I have a basic grasp of it. Ning Ke glanced at him and thought that he was really lucky. He asked, is there any special situation in the camp in the last 5 days? For example, are there any injured cavalrymen, or even generals? The Tang soldier thought for a while and shook his head. No. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, is there anything worth paying attention to in the logistics of food and medicine? The Tang soldier was about to answer no when he suddenly thought of something. He frowned and thought carefully for a while. Then he said, there is indeed something. The consumption of food in a tent seems to be a lot more than usual. This is not surprising. But there is also some problem with the storage of medicine in the camp. Before Ning Kai could continue to ask, he added, the military medicine is the focus of the department, so I think there is something wrong. The medicine that is consumed for no reason are not only the medicine for hemostasis and muscle regeneration, but also some powder to calm the mind. But these medicines should not be used these days. Hearing this, Ning Kai's eyes gradually brightened. He knew that his guess seemed to be in the right direction. He looked at the brightly lit Tang battalion and asked, where is that tent? Can you find out who is in it? This time, the 300 cavalrymen who escorted General Shu into the wilderness are all from Tiang City. That tent belongs to a deputy general of the Northern Army in the east. It is heavily guarded, and ordinary cavalrymen like me can't even get close. Ning Kai frowned slightly. His eyes slowly swept across the continuous tents, as if he wanted to see the military tent. He said, since it is so heavily guarded, is there any way to sneak in and take a look? The Tang soldier did not even think about it. He shook his head and said, unless you break in. Then he looked at Ning Kai and added very seriously, sir, although you are a respected foreign official and have a strong state, I am afraid there will be some problems if you break in. Even if you can break in, many people in the camp will die. How will you explain it to the imperial court afterwards? Since there was no way to sneak in, the only way was to break in. However, although he was now a student of the academy, he still regarded himself as a member of the imperial army. He would never take the initiative to fight against his fellow soldiers, so he had to think of another way. Taking advantage of the quiet night and the sparse stars, the guy who was placed in the Northern Army by the Imperial Center Administration sneaked back to the Tang Battalion. Only Ning Kai was left behind on the meadow. The sparse yellow grass on the cold ground looked like the beard of a malnourished old man. Ning Kai lay on the sparse grass and looked at the stars in the night sky above his head. No one knew what he was thinking. A shadow suddenly covered the starry sky above his head, as if the dark night had come. Ning Kai looked at the black horse's face close to him. He looked at its thick lips that seemed to be trying to please him. He could not help but scold it with a smile, the whole palace wants to catch you, and you still dare to come back to see me. The big black horse gently arched his shoulder. It looked extremely docile and even a little quiet, as if it was telling him that as long as he was not angry, it did not matter what others said to it. Ning Kai stood up and patted off the sand and grass on his back. He gently punched the big black horse's neck and shook his head. He lectured, people are afraid of being famous, while pigs are afraid of being fat. People are afraid of trouble when they are famous, and pigs are easy to be killed for meat when they are fat. Why do you have to be in the limelight? Aren't you afraid that you will be snatched away when you are too famous? The big black horse shook its head and opened its mouth. Its white teeth looked a little creepy under the starlight, as if it was sneering. It was indescribably cold, arrogant, and stupid. Ning Kai stared at its eyes and sneered, do you mean that even if you are snatched away, you will be treated like a treasure and will not be ordered around like an invincible horse like me? The big black horse gently kicked its hooves and silently dug the floating soil on the wilderness. It cautiously used silence to represent its admission. Ning Kai sneered and pointed at the middle of its two strong hind legs. He said, I don't know why the Southern Army didn't castrate you, nor did they castrate you in the field. I also don't know how you escaped the fate of being a eunuch. But you should know very well that I have no intention of castrating you. But my kindness does not mean that everyone else is. With your bad temper, do you really think that you can keep your precious eggs if you fall into the hands of Chanyu or the princess? A cold winter wind blew over the meadow. Fear suddenly appeared in the big black horse's black eyes. It was unknown whether it was because of the cold or something else, but it quickly clamped its hind legs together. However, because of its huge and powerful buttocks, it could not completely clamp them together. Ning Ke used the dark night to complete another spy contact in his life. He sorted out the situation of the Tang army and took the time to educate the big black horse. He did so many things. There were countless bonfires on the meadow. In the tents of the palace, it was as if it was daytime, but the people only did one thing, and that was to drink. The wilderness was like heaven in spring, but it was as miserable and unbearable as the underworld in midwinter. The cold wind howled and snowflakes fell at any time. It was extremely cold, so the people who lived here liked to drink to warm themselves up, especially hard liquor. The people of the Central Plains and the grassland barbarians beside the bonfire had been constantly fighting over trade and war for 1,000 years. The invasion of the borders not long ago and the counterattack by the Central Plains allied forces after that had caused many casualties on both sides. How could the hatred formed by blood naturally disappear just because the higher-ups had reached an agreement? With complicated emotions, the people of the Palace tribe began to compete in drinking with the people of the Central Plains. The alcohol entered their stomachs and did not dispel their hatred. Instead, it magnified their emotions. As a result, the drinking competition became a competition, and the competition became a brawl. The soldiers of the palace and the divine hall, who were in charge of maintaining order, had to rush to another place after quelling a fight. The scene was extremely chaotic. There were a few tents set up at the edge of the meadow. They were very close to the Tang army, but not within the range of the Tang army. They were not affected by the chaos around the bonfires and were still exceptionally quiet, just like the people who lived there. The girls from the Great River Kingdom saw many new and interesting things at the Gumumu gathering. They were quiet and composed, so they returned to the campsite in the evening. Mo Shanshan sat quietly in her tent for an entire day. White paper was spread out on the table, and she hung her wrist over it, copying something. It was as if she did not know the meaning of boredom. At this moment, the tent flap was lifted. Zhuo Zhihua walked in with a young girl. She looked at Mo Shanshan and said gently, "Hill Master, a guest has come to visit." Mo Shanshan slowly stopped writing. She put the brush into a jar of clear water and turned around. The young girl was wearing the uniform of the Revelation Institute of the Divine Hall, but there was an unconcealable pride in her eyes. She had been looking around since she entered the tent, trying her best to look calm. But when she saw the young girl in white beside the table turn around, she still felt a little nervous. Because this was the first time she had seen the legendary calligraphy addict. Mo Shanshan looked at her indifferently and said, "Who are you?" The calligraphy addict was used to speaking in such a direct tone. She did not like to talk nonsense. She was used to looking indifferent because she felt that it was very difficult to make an expression. She was used to looking disrespectful because her eyes were not very good. But just like Ning Ke, who did not know that someone had an eye disease, the female student of the Revelation Institute also felt that she had been severely underestimated and even humiliated. Her nervousness became a little irritated, but she still did not dare to be rude. Again, this was the first time she had seen the legendary calligraphy addict. The calligraphy addict was proud and rude. To the students of the Revelation Institute who had always been with another addict, it was easy to understand and accept. The female student of the Revelation Institute bowed respectfully and said, "Princess Chen Jia invites senior sister Mo for a chat tomorrow." Mo Shanshan looked at her quietly and thought of her old friend whom she had not seen for a long time. She thought of her old friend who was as calm as an orchid in the horse carriage above the meadow. After a moment of silence, she said, "I understand. Tonight, please do not talk to me about quality. It will be changed in the future. Tonight, please talk to me about dreams and about the honor of my father's generation. I do not believe that honor is my life. But the honor of my family seems to be taking my life." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 230. Everything in the world, be it human or emotional life, was most afraid of comparison. The girls from the Great River Kingdom chose a flat ground outside of the Tang camp to camp. Although it was a little cold and cheerless, they felt that it was quiet and not too dissatisfied. However, when they walked into the gorgeous tent where the students of the Revelation Institute were, no matter how tranquil they were, they could not help but feel a little sad when they saw the array equipment and exquisite food. They were all young people who came under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace. Why did the disciples of the Black Ink Garden not have a good camp in the military camp of the north of Yen Kingdom? They took on a difficult task and risked their lives to come to the palace, but they still did not have a good camp. But these students of the Revelation Institute had such good treatment when they came to the palace, humming and drinking tea. Especially when they recalled the bloody battle with the horse gang under the meadow, they thought that when they and the others were struggling in the camp and could die at any time, the students of the Revelation Institute were coldly watching from their mounts above the meadow. The girls of the Great River Kingdom found it more and more difficult to accept and were unusually depressed. The students of the Revelation Institute sitting opposite them were not sad, nor were they in low spirits. There was no shame on their faces for the robbery by the horse gang. They slowly drank the tea from the precious porcelain bowls in the wilderness and did their duty as hosts to talk gently with the girls of the Great River Kingdom. There was a faint sense of superiority in their words. The Revelation Institute was the research academy of Hautian Taoism. It was personally taught by the West Hill Divine Palace's divine priest. For thousands of years, it had cultivated many famous bigwigs. In recent years, the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, and Prince Long Qing, who were the priests of the judicial department of the Divine Hall, were well-known powerhouses. In the hearts of these young disciples, other than the academy in the south of Chang'an, there was no other place in the world that could be compared to the Revelation Institute. The girls of the Great River Kingdom suppressed their discomfort and hatred. The students of the Revelation Institute only cared about showing their demeanor and pride. Naturally, it was impossible for them to agree with each other. But there was no conflict because of this. They just gradually stopped talking and only talked to their own sect, as if they could not see each other. In any case, they were not the main characters today. The real main characters had already entered the depths of the tent. The conversation between the two girls behind the magnificent screen was the most important matter of the day. Ning Kei, who was wearing the disciple uniform of Black Ink Garden, was sitting on a chair below. He leaned sideways and whispered something to Cat Girl. From time to time, Cat Girl's innocent and lovely face showed a strange and excited expression. Her little hand gently stroked a square box beside her, looking extremely cautious. Could this be a gift from the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, to the flower addict, Lu Chenjia? There were countless beauties in the world, but only 3 were famous. According to the gossip of the world, the flower addict Lu Chenjia, the princess of the Yueluan kingdom, the calligraphy addict Mo Shanshan, the last female disciple of the master of calligrapher of the Great River Kingdom, and the Tao addict Yi Hongyu of the judicial department of West Hill were known as the 3 addicts of the world. The beauty in everyone's eyes was different. Naturally, there was no such thing as the most beautiful person in the world. The reason why there were the 3 fanatics in the world was because these 3 girls were obsessed with a certain realm. Their cultivation realms were profound, and they had powerful backgrounds. Behind the magnificent screen in the depths of the tent, Mo Shanshan looked expressionlessly at the beautiful girl in a light yellow slanted shirt. She said, "You were on the meadow that day." Lu Chenjia was diligently trimming the branches and leaves of an exotic 7-petal flower. When she heard this, she raised her head and smiled. She said, "This is the flower that the princess treasures. It's a pity that she didn't raise it properly. The roots have no spirit, and the flower naturally has no soul when it blooms. It's so pale that it hurts." The princess of the Yueluan kingdom had loved flowers since she was young. Before she met the perfect man in the palace, flowers were everything to her. They were even more important than her own life. Because of her love affair with Prince Long Qing and her love for flowers, everyone in the world knew of her reputation. However, when people talked about her, they could not help but talk about her appearance first. The flower addict, Lu Chenjia, was very beautiful. Her eyelashes and brows were all beautiful. She looked beautiful from every angle. She was like a meticulously cultivated flower, its petals trembling in the spring breeze. Sometimes it was budding, sometimes it was blooming, and sometimes it was shy. She was beautiful. The calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, was completely different from her. Her eyebrows were thin and thick, as if they were drawn by an ink brush. Although her gaze was unfocused, it was truly clear without any distractions. Her lips were pressed into a line, and her slightly round cheeks did not seem to have the characteristics of a traditional beauty. However, when these seemingly ordinary details were put together, no matter how dull her expression was, she still looked very beautiful. This was what Ning Ke thought when he first saw her. No other adjectives could describe the appearance of this girl from the Great River Kingdom. They might even seem redundant. He could only praise her as beautiful. This kind of beauty was not as moving and clear as Lu Chenjia's beauty. However, because it did not have any lethality, it would not be a burden to anyone's eyes. Instead, it would make the viewer feel relaxed. This kind of beauty could be looked at properly. There was no emotion on Mo Shanshan's beautiful face. She looked at Lu Chenjia and said calmly, "Since you admit that you were on the meadow at that time, then there is nothing more to say about this matter." Lu Chenjia looked at her quietly and smiled. "Sister Mo, do you want to ask me something? You admit it so calmly. Why ask again? But since you insist, I will ask." Mo Shanshan's expression was very calm. One could not tell if she was angry or happy. She said as if she was talking about someone else, "Since you were in the horse carriage on the meadow at that time, you naturally knew that the camp below was being surrounded by the horse gang. You should also know that there were disciples of the Black Ink Garden in the camp. Why did you not let the cavalrymen of Divine Hall come to help?" Lu Chenjia pursed her lips slightly and said, "After entering the wilderness, I was just an ordinary student of the Revelation Institute. How could I order the cavalrymen of Divine Hall?" Mo Shanshan looked at her indifferently, as if she was looking at the pot of flowers in front of her. She said, "If you were just an ordinary student of the Revelation Institute, you should be waiting outside at this time. How could you be qualified to sit and talk to me?" Lu Chenjia frowned slightly. She felt that the girl in white in front of her was very different from the calligraphy addict in her memories. Mo Shanshan did not care about what she was thinking and continued coldly, "The cavalrymen of Divine Hall are under the jurisdiction of the Judicial Department. You are Long Qing's fiancé. Why would they dare to disobey your orders?" She looked at Lu Chenjia and said indifferently, "If you do not want to talk about what happened on the meadow that day, then I will not. Since you want to talk about it, then don't spout nonsense. You are the flower addict, not an idiot." Lu Chenjia still did not speak. She slowly put down the small scissors in her hand and focused on Mo Shanshan opposite her. A trace of a smile appeared in her eyes. She thought to herself, what had caused the calligraphy addict to change so much? Mo Shanshan's accusations were not very sharp. Anyone could understand what had happened on the meadow that day. No matter how silent or what the flower addict, Lu Chenjia, had to bear the responsibility. Lu Chenjia did not care about these accusations. She was more concerned about Mo Shanshan's current behavior. According to her memory and the knowledge of the world, the calligraphy addict was someone who knelt in front of brush, ink, paper, and inkstone all day long. She did not care about the affairs of the world and would not speak her mind because she thought it was troublesome. She was extremely quiet and quiet. She had thought that since she invited Mo Shanshan to meet today, no matter how angry she was over the horse gang, she would not criticize her face to face. She did not expect Mo Shanshan to be so direct and tough. Lu Chenjia looked at her quietly. After a long silence, she said, "Sister Mo, you have changed. You have become much more direct and mean. I am very surprised and surprised." Mo Shanshan thought about it seriously for a moment and replied, "I did not know that being direct would sometimes have an effect of being mean." Lu Chenjia looked at her and sighed softly. She smiled bitterly and said, "I did not expect that even you have changed." Mo Shanshan replied calmly, I have learned many things from someone recently. I am getting used to this change. Lu Chenjia was silent for a moment and asked softly, "Did you come today to criticize me?" Mo Shanshan replied calmly and firmly, "If I did not come to criticize you, why would I come to see you?" Lu Chenjia sighed and said, "I only knew that you were under the meadow when you used the half-divine talisman." Mo Shanshan looked at her beautiful face and paused for a moment before saying, "Even if I was not under the meadow, there would be others under the blades of the horse gang." Lu Chenjia said calmly, "I know you and I admire you. So your life and death are related to me. If you die, I will be sad. The life and death of others have nothing to do with me. Naturally, I will not care." Mo Shanshan said, "I have a junior brother who died in the last attack of the horse gang." Lu Chenjia's tone was still calm. "I do not know your junior brother. So his life and death have nothing to do with me." Mo Shanshan looked at the precious flower tree beside her quietly and said, "Most people in the world have nothing to do with you and me. But this world has something to do with you and me. Because sorrow and joy are always interlinked. The sorrow and joy of humans are never interlinked." Lu Chenjia raised her beautiful face and said, "Why do people like you and me have to share the sorrow and joy of the people in the dirty world? Other than flowers and a few people, there is nothing clean in the world. But you and I are clean. If you and I care about the dirty world, we will be dragged into the dust one day. What does the sorrow and joy of the world have to do with me?" Mo Shanshan's eyes drooped slightly. She looked at the mud stains on the bottom of her white dress. After a moment of silence, she raised her head and looked at her quietly. She said, "Ever since I was young, I could not win against you in an argument. I will not pretend to be a simple, sweet, and quiet orchid in front of others. So I do not want to talk to you anymore." Lu Chenjia looked at her and said emotionally, "You are being mean again. This is not good." Mo Shanshan replied calmly, "I am not being mean enough because you are not angry." Lu Chenjia frowned slightly and asked, "Why do you want to make me angry?" Mo Shanshan said, "Because I am angry because you do not know the reason why others are angry but do not care about it. It is also because I was angry under the meadow that day." There was silence in the depths of the magnificent tent. The long silence caused an inexplicable pressure to slowly surround them. The vines on the screen seemed to be about to be broken by this pressure. After some time, Lu Chenjia looked at her calmly and said, "I want to know how you will make me angry." Mo Shanshan said, "You should have known since young that I am not good with words. I have spent my entire life in front of paper and ink, so I am used to fighting. If I completely defeat you, I wonder if you will be angry?" Lu Chenjia smiled slightly. She was like a water lily in a pond in the morning that was suddenly woken up by the chirping of a few birds. She slowly began to bloom its beautiful petals. It was so beautiful and quiet that one could not feel any hostility or desire to fight. The flower addict was the flower addict. She was infatuated with love, infatuated with her own knowledge and thoughts. She did not want to fight Mo Shanshan, so she did not prepare to do so. She only smiled quietly at Mo Shanshan. Facing such a beautiful girl who was smiling calmly at them, most people in the world, no matter how strong a cultivator's heart was, would not know what to do next. Did they really have to throw a punch? However, Mo Shanshan was the calligraphy addict. She had her own obsession. When she was obsessed, she was even more ruthless than the flower addict. When she decided to do something, she did not care what the situation was. Even if Lu Chenjia was a faint flower fragrance or a fragile jade carving, she did not have the spirit to pity her and attack directly. Two slender and steady fingers reached out of her wide sleeves. They were not swords but pens. They suddenly turned and began to write their own lines on the invisible paper on the invisible table in the air. Mo Shanshan's first move was the half-divine talisman. Lu Chenjia sat quietly in the chair. Suddenly, a transparent flower appeared on her fingers. The flower could not be said to be completely transparent. On its surface, there was a faint flow of primordial qi that resembled dew droplets flowing slowly. It looked like it was carved from fog and glaze. It was extremely beautiful. A terrifying pressure enveloped the tent as the half-divine talisman was drawn. A fresh aura seeped out of the tent along with the appearance of the flower. In a tent, the priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace sensed the two auras coming from afar. He woke up from his meditation and looked in that direction through the curtain. He let out a soft sigh. The half-divine talisman was so full of energy. The calligraphy addict seemed to be stronger than when they met the thief on the meadow. Even he did not dare to say that he could win. Qinjia, this flower, was probably going to lose. Lu Qinjia looked at the flower that finally melted into the air and disappeared. She looked at the girl in white and said calmly, "My cultivation state is not as good as yours, and I am not as good as the Tao addict. But I really don't care. If I lose, I lose. What I like is cutting flowers and leaves." Mo Shanshan slowly retracted her right hand into her wide sleeves. She looked at her and said, "If you are only obsessed with flowers, then you are naturally not the flower addict." Lu Qinjia seemed to have thought of something. A gentle smile appeared on her face. There was also a hint of disappointment. She said, "The flower addict, the flower addict. I think it should be enough to be obsessed with people and flowers." Mo Shanshan stood up and looked at her. She said, "Back then, you used to hold a hoe and dig in the mud. Your hands were covered in dust and your face was covered in sweat. I think you were better then than the so-called quiet you now." Lu Qinjia lowered her head and continued cutting flowers. She said, "But he likes the current me more, and he will protect me." Mo Shanshan looked at her silently. Her lips curled into a smile. It was the first time in her life that she had learned to smile like a winner, so she looked a little awkward. "Someone told me last night that it doesn't matter how quiet you appear after you lose. But if you mention Longqing, it means that you are starting to get angry. Then you will really lose." Lu Qinjia smiled and did not reply. The small scissors in her hands had cut off a green leaf. This chapter is better written than the previous one. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 231. The green leaves drifted down from the branches and slowly landed on the expensive wool carpet without making any sound. Lu Qinjia looked at the beautiful patterns on the wool carpet quietly. She looked at the lonely green leaf in the middle of the pattern. No one knew what she was thinking. After a long silence, she said softly, "My feelings for him are as natural as the orchids in the valley." Why did I mention it? Do I want to prove something? Mo Shanshan answered directly. He said that this is a public display of affection and a sign of lack of confidence. I don't know what it means to show off. I don't know why he said that, and I don't know what you want to prove either. But I know that orchids growing in the valley is natural. When you moved the flower in front of me and carefully cut it, it was no longer natural. She did not say anything else. She did not bid farewell and turned to walk out of the screen. Lu Qinjia stood up. Her eyes that were as clear as autumn water showed a faint dimness. She looked at her back and said, "The hot tea you wanted has not been served. Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" "That is the intoxicating grass that I specially brought from Peach Mountain. I remember that you liked it the most back then." Mo Shanshan stopped in her tracks. She did not turn back and replied calmly, "Compared to a cup of tea, I actually hope to see you in the camp under the meadow. Then you could treat me to a cup of plain water." Lu Qinjia's hand that was holding the small scissors turned pale. She said softly, "At the beginning, I did not know that you were in the camp. I also did not think that the horse gang could threaten you. If you were really in danger, do you think that I would still sit quietly in the carriage and ignore you?" Mo Shanshan reached out and held the side of the screen. She said, "I have said that this is not about you and me. It is about the world. You can ignore the external feelings of joy and sorrow, but I cannot and do not want to be that kind of person." The screen slid open, and the girl in white with an indifferent expression slowly walked out. The disciples of Black Ink Garden who were drinking tea outside and had nothing to do all stood up to welcome her. The students of Revelation Institute on the opposite side also stood up. Mo Shanshan looked at Zhuo Zhihua and nodded gently. Her peers then knew that the Hill Master was not polite to the flower addict during the conversation inside the room. Suddenly, their chests were filled with joy. Ignoring the enthusiasm of the Revelation Institute students to ask them to stay, and not even bothering to say a word, the disciples of Black Ink Garden proudly walked out of the magnificent tent with their heads held high. Outside the tent, the blue sky was high and far. There was not a single cloud. The girl in white squinted her eyes and looked at the sky. She thought about how Lu Qinjia had finally lowered her head and lost her arrogance. She could not help but feel relieved. Only then did she understand that this was bullying. Only then did she understand that the so-called revenge was not limited to words or fists. Thinking of this, she looked back at Ning Ke, who was standing quietly in the group of girls. She thought to herself, as a disciple of the Academy of the Tang Empire, he should be generous, but why is he so meticulous? The girls of the Great River Kingdom returned to their own campsite and could no longer suppress their curiosity. They began to ask the Hill Master what she had said to the flower addict. The tent was filled with chatter and bustle. Even Ning Ke looked towards her. After a moment of silence, Mo Shanshan repeated the previous conversation. The joys and sorrows of the world have nothing to do with her. Does senior brother's death under the meadow have nothing to do with her? It seems that we, the people of the world, are not even comparable to a flower in the eyes of the princess. Cat Girl held the box and said loudly, unable to suppress her anger. If this square box was a gift from Black Ink Garden to the Revelation Institute, why did she bring it back? The flower addict princess seems to be quiet and gentle, but her heart is not in the world. This matter has nothing to do with her. The ones who deserve to die are the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the old woman who is standing on the meadow and watching coldly. Zhuo Zhihua shook her head and looked at the box in Cat Girl's arms. She frowned and asked curiously, "What is this?" "This is a secret weapon. Yesterday, senior brother Zhong and I spent 100 taels of silver to buy it from someone." Cat Girl hugged the box tightly and snorted. She said indignantly, "It's a pity that senior sister Shanshan refused to use it." Mo Shanshan gently smoothed the paper on the table with her right hand. A few strands of hair fell from her ears. She said, "Even though Qinjia didn't say it, I have already taught her a lesson. There's no need to humiliate her further." Ning Ke could not help but shake his head when he heard this. In the traveling carriage, he had taught the calligraphy addict on the first day. There was an eternal truth that one had to be beaten to death. Asking for justice and bullying was not much different from beating someone up. Since they were going to fall out with each other, of course, they had to humiliate the other party to death. He looked at the calligraphy addict, who was about to start practicing calligraphy again. He suddenly realized that ever since he entered the back of the mountain of the academy, he had been obsessed with cultivation and had forgotten about writing for a long time. Suddenly, he realized something else. Ever since he had combed her hair once in the carriage at the tragic camp, she had maintained this hairstyle. Her black hair was simply tied behind her back, revealing her fair and beautiful face, making her look even more graceful and elegant. Zhuo Zhihua said to the crowd, "The Divine Hall will convene a meeting in the afternoon to discuss the matter of assisting the palace and sending troops against the desolate man next year. Disciples of all sects must attend. Everyone, eat early and don't waste time." The grassland people lived on mutton and there was no rice in their meals. Even though the palace had shown enough sincerity to the people from the Central Plains, the most expensive and scarce rice would, of course, be given to the Divine Hall and the Tang army first. Therefore, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden still had oily mutton and mutton soup for lunch today. No matter how much they cooked, mutton was still mutton. After leaving the Blue Loin Sea, these girls had almost never eaten anything else. Yesterday, they had eaten too many new things at the Gumumu meeting. At this time, looking at the plate full of mutton, they found it difficult to get sick of it. Only Ning Ke was still eating carefully. It was said that poor children matured early. So a child who had encountered a rare famine and was tortured to the point of death when he was young would never waste food when he grew up. While chewing slowly, his brain was also working quickly, thinking about other things. The horse gang from the grassland came to kill him, which meant that his identity must have been exposed. But he did not know to what extent and how many people in the palace knew of his existence. The Tang camp in the east was full of the elite cavalry of the northeast border military. What was the relationship between General Shu from Chang'an and Sheho? According to the analysis of His Majesty's secret edict before he left, once he revealed his identity, General Shu's buttocks should be sitting next to his buttocks. Until now, he still did not think that the big black horse was a big possibility of his identity being exposed. It had to be said that the great His Majesty and the handsome old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion had met countless people in their lives, but they had made a big mistake in using Ning Quebec. If he was a general, he would definitely be able to defeat everyone, but if he was to be a gold medal secret agent, he would be quite a failure. After lunch, Ning Ke wiped his oily mouth and took the slightly heavy square box from Cat Girl and held it in his arms. Under the warm winter sun, he walked to the bustling area near the palace. The Gumumu gathered a large number of people. Where there were people, there would naturally be business. The lively grassland was where the merchants gathered. Other than the neighboring tribes selling their goods, there were also a few brave caravans from the Central Plains. Somehow, they managed to follow the Divine Temple's negotiation team to this place. The things in the box in his arms were goods that a merchant from the Yen Kingdom had specially brought to win the favor of the Chanyu princess. Last night, he had paid a high price of 100 taels of silver and even used the name of the flower addict Lu Chenjia to barely buy it. Since Mo Shanshan did not want to use it, and he could not bring it back to Chang'an, he naturally did not want it to freeze to death in the cold wilderness. So he decided to ask the Yen Kingdom merchant for a refund, even if it was only 80 taels of silver. Even though he was now an invisible tycoon in Chang'an, 100 taels of silver was a huge amount. Not to mention that he would not be able to report it to Sang Sang when he returned, even if it was only 80 taels of silver. However, before he reached the place, he was stopped by someone. Hearing the gradually gathering footsteps around him, Ning Ke could not help but raise his eyebrows as he looked at the cold and arrogant Revelation Institute student in front of him. He thought to himself that these people were after all believers of Haotian, and they would not be like the gangsters in Chang and West City who would pull out their swords after blocking the street. So he did not move. More than a dozen Revelation Institute students surrounded Ning Ke in the middle. They seemed to be standing loosely, but in fact, they had blocked all possible escape routes. However, as Ning Ke expected, these people did not rush up to beat him up. The arrogant Revelation Institute student in front of him even bowed politely. The student of the Revelation Institute said, "Senior brother of the Black Ink Garden, could you please meet someone?" Ning Ke completely believed that if he said it was not convenient, then what was going to happen next would be very inconvenient for the children to see. He was not afraid of anything, but he guessed that the person who could mobilize so many Revelation Institute students to invite him to meet must be that girl. So he smiled and obediently followed them. On a green meadow outside the tent, the princess of Yueluan Kingdom, Lu Chenjia, sat on a snow-white horse. She raised her hand and signaled for everyone to leave. There were only 2 people and a horse left on the meadow. She looked down at Ning Ke quietly with a strange expression. After a long time, she said softly, "I have known Shanshan for many years. Although we have not seen each other for a while, we still write to each other. What is strange is that the calligraphy addict who spoke to me in the tent today seems to have changed into another person." Ning Ke did not expect the girl on the horse to start asking questions so directly. He could not help but feel that it was a little sudden. He did not even have the time to look closely at what this legendary beauty looked like. Lu Chenjia did not wait for him to reply and said with a serious gaze, "She said that she learned a lot from someone. I am very curious about who that someone is, so I took the liberty to invite you over to ask." Ning Ke was slightly stunned and replied sincerely, I do not know what your highness is talking about. Lu Qinjia looked up into the distance and did not even look at him. She said, I also do not know when the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had a male disciple like you. Who are you? Ning Ke clenched his fists and swore bitterly in his heart that if His Majesty wanted him to be a spy after returning to Chang'an, he would not be stupid enough to agree again. He would not hesitate even if it meant that he would die a little later. If it were not for Miss Elan's kindness tonight, I would not have been able to write a single word. I will send you 3,000 yuan for each chapter and make some adjustments. I will send you 5,000 yuan tomorrow. In addition, I will seriously and attentively recommend the new book of the fattest fatty in the Northeast. My classmate Ir Jen has finally released a new book. After defying the Celestial, he intends to ask for the devil. Everyone, please trample on him. There is no need to give him face. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 232. Looking at the beautiful girl on the white horse, her hair blown by the winter wind, Ning Ke's heart ached. He knew that the situation he was facing now was a little tricky. He did not have many choices left. He could either defeat her from the horse or reveal his identity as a student of the academy. But should he call himself Zhong Dajuan or something else? The problem was that this girl was one of the 3 addicts in the world. Even though her cultivation state was not as high as the Tao addict and Mo Shanshan, her cultivation state was at the upper see-through state, which was enough to bully him. As for revealing his identity as a student of the academy, Ning Ke was still a little hesitant. Lu Qinjia looked down at him calmly. From her expression, it could be seen that she did not care about his answer at all. She continued, harsh, bitter, and dark. The calligraphy addict I met today disappointed me. Because she was originally like me, a rare pure person in this world. She was one of the few friends I had in this chaotic and disappointing world. So I am very curious as to who caused such a huge change in her. I know that there are many dark and ugly things in the world that people like you regard as wisdom. I do not understand and do not want to get involved. I also do not want her to get involved. I hope that you will stay away from her in the future. Ning Ke raised his head to look at the beautiful princess on horseback and replied gently, Your Highness, I don't think I need your advice on the relationship between me and the Hill Master. And I don't think such advice will be effective. Shanshan is pure in nature and has not experienced the affairs of the world. When she first comes into contact with your dark tricks, she will probably find it interesting and think that it is the truth. But you must remember that you men are ultimately the dust and dirt of the world. No matter how you try to cover it up with words and actions, you will one day reveal the filth within. Lu Qinjia looked at him coldly and did not hide her disgust. She said, I just don't want her to be deceived by you. I don't want her to experience disappointment. That is why I came to see you to say these words. Hearing this, Ning Ke was certain of a few things. The legendary Anthomaniac princess was not a naive girl who only knew about flowers and plants and hid in her garden. On the contrary, she was very intelligent and sensitive. She could quickly find out the possible reason for Mo Shanshan's change. Moreover, she was a bit of a neat freak both physically and mentally. Thinking of the battle with the horse gang, the cavalryman of Divine Hall on the meadow, the horse carriage in the middle of the cavalryman, and the beautiful girl in front of him was also in the carriage at that time, Ning Ke became more and more confused. Where did her obsession with spiritual cleanliness come from? How did it manifest in her daily life? Men are filthy things like mud, and women are pure spring water? Ning Ke looked at Lu Qinjia, who was on horseback. He smiled and said, Is that what your highness is trying to say? Lu Qinjia's expression changed slightly. She did not expect this dark and dirty man to be able to summarize her thoughts so accurately and concisely. While she was surprised, the pride hidden under her calm and gentle appearance prevented her from mocking Ning Ke again. Instead, she nodded. Ning Ke suddenly smiled and asked, What about Prince Long Qing? During his discussion with Mo Shanshan last night, he had mentioned that the flower addict, Lu Chenjia, who had grown up around the White Tower and lived in the imperial palace since she was a child, was as pure as a piece of paper in terms of cultivation and love. They could only start from these two aspects if they wanted to grab hold of the gap between her and Prince Longqing. Everyone knew about her relationship with Prince Longqing, so her so-called feelings would naturally fall on that perfect man. Lu Chenjia sensed that the young man with the hateful smile on his face had brought up Prince Longqing. She smiled mockingly and said calmly, "An idiot like you would naturally not understand that a perfect and flawless man lives in the pure and bright world that you will never be able to touch." Hearing these words, especially the words, perfect and flawless, Ning Ke could not help but think of Song Song's evaluation of Prince Longqing in the wine shop in Chang'an. He could not help but shake his head and laugh. Lu Chenjia's face turned cold when she saw him laughing for no reason. That was because his laughter was obviously because of Prince Longqing. To her, this was even more serious than humiliating herself. Ning Ke suddenly stopped smiling and looked at the beautiful girl on the horse. He asked seriously, "In this world, other than the West Hill Divine Palace after the light and the wordless flowers and plants that you cherish so much, everything else is dirty and untouchable?" "Then I really want to know, Your Highness, do you really think that everything that happened on the meadow that day was clean?" Lu Chenjia looked into his eyes and said calmly, "That has nothing to do with me. I only know that if you want to use this to drive a wedge between me and Shanshan and lure her into the path of darkness, then you deserve to die." Ning Ke looked back into her eyes and said gently, "What are you saying? If Your Highness really wanted to kill me, you would have done so long ago. Why did you specially call me here to talk in private?" Lu Chenjia gently stroked the neck of the white horse and said softly, "I just want to remind you today that no matter what you are thinking, even if you can hide it from Shanshan, you can't hide it from me and everyone else in the world. You are just an insignificant person like a worm. There are many people in the world who can make you wish you were dead." Ning Ke's expression became gentler and calmer. He said softly, "What you are doing now seems to be the dirty methods of the world that you hate." Lu Chenjia looked at him and said, "Haotian saw the suffering of the world and turned herself into an old woman to help the people and kill the evil. I don't want to get involved in your dirty ways, but it doesn't mean that I will never use harsh methods." At this moment, there was no coldness or disgust in her eyes. There was only calmness and gentleness. However, this calmness and gentleness made one feel even more depressed. That was because the gaze in her clear and moving eyes seemed to be looking at a mud skipper struggling in the mud. There was no pity, just a natural look of disdain. She was the flower addict of the 3 addicts in the world. She was a fairy above the clouds and should not be tainted by dust. On the other hand, Ning Ke was just an insignificant person who tried to get close to another addict with some petty tricks. It was natural for her to look down on him. It was natural for her to want him to obey her words. There was no unnatural feeling. This was the norm in the world. Ning Ke had seen many colder gazes since he was young. His skin was as thick as a wall and he did not care about the girl's expression at all. He smiled and replied, "Being alive is definitely better than being dead. I really can't think of any situation that can make people feel that they are better off dead than alive." Lu Chenjia asked, "Are you really curious?" Ning Ke smiled and said, "This kind of thing is too dangerous. It's safer not to be curious." Lu Chenjia looked at him quietly and suddenly smiled. She said, "An insignificant person will always be an insignificant person. He only knows how to talk and play petty tricks. He will never dare to show the slightest bit of bravery in the real world." Perhaps the girl wanted to use these words to anger Ning Ke so that she would have a reason to punish him. Or perhaps she was just a little disappointed and emotional after seeing Ning Ke's performance. However, when Ning Ke heard this, he suddenly became silent. He looked up at the azure sky and at the cloud that was gradually floating above the meadow. He frowned slightly and began to think about some problems. After the journey, he reflected on the 2 years since he left the city of Wei. The winter wind blew from afar in the wilderness, blowing his clothes and Lu Chenjia's hair. He did not speak, and neither did Lu Chenjia. Both of them were silent on the horse and on the horse. When I was in the city of Wei, the highest official was General Ma. That general only had a few hundred people under him. He was really powerful. However, I have seen General Shao Qi of the 7th Link Stockade Village once. I was very excited because I was rewarded for my meritorious service. However, I did not expect that General Shao Qi did not even look me in the eye and left in a hurry after handing out the reward. I reckon that he still does not remember who I am. Ning Ke retracted his gaze and looked at the girl on the horse. He smiled and said, "From that day on, I understood that no matter how many military achievements I made, would always be an insignificant person. At that time, I did not know what cultivators looked like. I thought that you were all immortals who could fly in the sky. I did not know what kind of divine realm your world was. I thought that you all lived in a fairyland in the sky. As for the divine hall, Prince Long Qing, the Tao addict, the calligraphy addict, the flower addict, and the 3 addicts of the world, to me, an insignificant person, they were existences above the clouds. I did not even dare to hope to get close to them." He pointed at the cloud floating above the meadow. "But now, many things seem to have changed. For example, I can sit in the same carriage with the calligraphy addict. For example, Your Highness, you are now on a horse and not on the cloud. You are so close to me." Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, "We are so close that I can touch your face with my hand. I believe that other than the King of Yueluan Kingdom and Prince Long Qing, no one else has touched your face before. Don't be angry. I am just using this to explain something. The changes I mentioned just now were too intense and fast. It was so fast that I could only accept it passively. I did not have the time to summarize and analyze it. I did not have the time to discover a fact. That is why there are so many problems." Lu Chenjia looked at him quietly and asked, "What fact?" "The fact is that I am no longer an insignificant person." "Then, I should not do things in the style of an insignificant person." After saying this, Ning Ke smiled. His dimples filled the winter wind blowing on the wilderness. His eyes reflected the white clouds floating in the sky. He was incomparably fresh and confident. He knew that the girl on the horse had psychological problems. He had prepared some other means, the means of an insignificant person. However, after being pressured by the other party, he suddenly thought of what second brother had told him before he left. He thought about what second brother would do if he was in second brother's shoes. Second brother was his idol, and youngest uncle was second brother's idol. Then, what would youngest uncle do if he was in second brother's shoes? Based on second brother's arrogant character, he would probably take off the ancient crown on his head and use it as a club to beat the flower addict on the horse until her face was swollen. He would definitely not have tender feelings for the fairer sex. If it was youngest uncle, he would probably pull out his sword and cut off the head of the arrogant white horse. Then, he would step on the flower addict's face. Ning Ke was not like second brother, who had reached the knowing destiny state. He was also not like youngest uncle, who had left Jianghu for a long time but was still a legend. He was just a newcomer and his state was pathetically at no doubt state. However, he was still a student at the back of the mountain of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. He did not have the ability to defeat the 3 addicts of the world. He could not drag Lu Chenjia off the horse, take off her pants, and spank her bare butt until it turned red. Then, he could ask Mo Shanshan to draw a sketch and send it to Prince Long Qing. However, since he had already understood that he should leave the world of insignificant people and decided to reveal his identity, he naturally had his own way. "When I bought this gift yesterday, I told the merchant from the Yen Kingdom that it was for you. Only then did he agree to sell it to me. I spent 100 taels of silver on it. It's not cheap." Ning Ke picked up the square box that he had been holding in his arms and untied the cloth on it. In the box was a small flower tree that was secured by a straw frame and protected by a paper film. He tore off the paper film and showed Lu Chenjia the breathtakingly beautiful blue petals and green stems. He said, "Of course, even if I gave this flower to you now, I believe that you would not change your opinion of me. So, I'm just letting you take a look." Lu Chenjia was slightly stunned. She looked at the blue flower tree in his hands and recognized that it was an extremely rare 7-petal blue lotus. This lotus was blue in color and extremely beautiful. Unfortunately, even though this flower was resistant to drought and cold, it was often accompanied by extremely strong nemesis. Therefore, there were very few of them in the world. The 7-petal blue lotus is indeed a good flower. It's not expensive to sell it for 100 taels of silver in the wilderness. Even though Lu Chenjia hated Ning Ke, she was a flower addict and naturally loved flowers. Her evaluation was extremely objective and honest. Then, she frowned slightly and reprimanded, "Even if the 7-petal blue lotus is resistant to cold, it is still a plant from the south of Yen. How can it withstand the cold wind in the wilderness? Hurry up and put away the paper film." Ning Ke was very obedient. The girl on the horse asked him to keep it, so he kept it. However, he did not keep the rare flower tree in his hands, but the hands that were holding the flower pot. The flowering tree slipped from his hands and instantly fell to his feet. When it touched the hard ground of the wilderness, the flower pot cracked and shattered like fragile glass. The paper film of the straw rack was all smashed. The beautiful flowering tree inside suddenly became unrecognizable. Its petals were scattered and its green branches were broken. It seemed that it would never come back to life again. Lu Chenjia's expression changed drastically. She pulled the reins and took a few steps forward, but she could not stop this from happening. The beautiful blue petals were scattered on the ground. They rolled slowly in the wind and were stained with a lot of dust. The straw frame and paper film covered the rustling flower tree. The scene was extremely messy. She looked at the broken flowers on the ground in front of the horse and her beautiful face suddenly paled. Her eyes revealed a look of pity. Then, she slowly turned around and looked at Ning Ke quietly. She said, "Are you provoking me?" Tragedy was tearing the beauty of life apart and showing it to others. Everyone saw the beauty of life differently. The things that they cherished and loved were also different. Money, beauty, power, knowledge, cultivation, and so on. In Lu Chenjia's heart, the beauty of life was not the happiness of the secular world, but the flowers and plants that had nothing to do with the secular world. The deaths of the people in the camp below the meadow did not make her sad. Even if the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the students of the Revelation Institute fell in front of her, she would not feel sad. But when the 7-petal blue lotus was smashed into the mud in front of her, she really felt a wave of heartache. She knew that the young man in front of the horse had done it on purpose. So besides feeling heartache, she started to get angry. Hearing the sound of the flower pot breaking, the students of the Revelation Institute who were scattered around the meadow did not know what had happened. They rushed over as fast as they could. When they saw the broken flowers on the ground and the unconcealable pain and anger in Princess Lu Chenjia's eyes, they vaguely guessed what had happened. Everyone knew that Her Highness was crazy about flowers. This young man in the uniform of the Black Ink Garden actually dared to do such a thing in front of Her Highness. That was the greatest harm to Her Highness. It was a shameless provocation. With a series of clangs, the steel swords engraved with the talisman patterns of the Divine Hall were unsheathed. Everyone angrily surrounded Ning Quebec. Lu Chenjia got off the horse and walked towards Ning Quebec. She frowned and asked, "What good does my sadness and anger do to you?" Ning Ke looked at her and explained with a smile, "In the tent this morning, you once told Shanshan that the sadness and happiness of the world have nothing to do with you. So I think that my relationship with Shanshan and how I affect her has nothing to do with you. As for this 7-petal blue lotus, I was the one who bought it. So me smashing it has nothing to do with you. Whether you are sad or angry because of this has nothing to do with me. Since that is the case, it is none of your business if I smash it for fun." Lu Chenjia looked into his eyes and said, "Flowers can't speak. They only bloom quietly. But in your hands, they have become a sacrifice in the battle between people. Don't you think that this is unfair to them? Ning Ke looked into her eyes and said, those who died in the meadow, such as the senior brother from the Black Ink Garden, can't speak now either. So this world is unfair to them. Of course, I am not someone who likes to fight for injustice. What I care about is that you threatened me earlier, so I have to make you unhappy. That is very fair. Lu Chenjie suddenly asked, who exactly are you? The shattering of the blue lotus on the meadow in the wilderness seemed like a small matter, but in reality, it was like a hard slap to the girl's face. Moreover, she was not an ordinary girl. She was one of the 3 addicts in the world. She had the Yueluan kingdom and the divine hall behind her. She was someone who was favored by both Buddhism and Taoism. Even the prince of the Tang Empire would not provoke her in such a way. So even though she was furious, she was still trying to guess Ning Ke's identity. Was he a daring and foolish person, or did he have a powerful background that allowed him to be unafraid of the Taoism and Buddhism sects? The first thing that was revealed was not Ning Ke's identity, but another identity that Lu Chenjie and the students of the Revelation Institute wanted to know, the identity of the owner of the big black horse. Ning Ke put his finger between his lips and blew a clear and even shrill whistle. After a while, loud hoofbeats sounded in the field to the north of the camp. The hoofbeats were messy and dense, as if the horses were in high spirits and happy. The big black horse came from afar and rushed to the meadow. Then, it walked carefully to Ning Ke's side and gently nudged his shoulder. It looked unusually docile. The unusually handsome snow horse behind Lu Chenjie suddenly saw the big black horse appear in front of it. It remembered the painful experience yesterday and was not comforted by the big black horse's docile expression. It retreated in fear. The reins broke free from Lu Chenjie's hand. Lu Chenjie looked at Ning Ke and the big black horse beside him, as well as the broken flowers and branches at his feet. Ning Ke's gentle expression finally disappeared. She stared at him coldly and said, so, it's all because of you. Ning Ke cupped his hands in greeting and said gently, yes. The big black horse was the focus of everyone's discussion during the Gumumu gathering. The Chanyu of the palace and many other bigwigs were looking for it. They wanted to make it their own mount. Its sudden appearance had attracted countless people in the tribe. A dense crowd chased after it and came to the meadow at the same time. Lu Chenjie's voice was slightly cold as she said, do you think I won't dare to kill you just because there are so many people watching? I've said it before. You filth in the mortal world only know how to use petty tricks. You don't know that strength is everything. I know I'm weak, but I also know that strength doesn't mean everything. Ning Ke took out an waist token from his chest and held it in the air. He said, sometimes, background is more important. A student of the Revelation Institute saw the words on the waist token and frowned. He said, Fish Dragon Sect, what is this? Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He looked at the waist token and smiled. Sorry, I took the wrong one. He changed the waist token and held it in front of Lu Chenjie. The expressions of the students of the Revelation Institute changed slightly. Someone shouted, so what if you're a student of the academy? Ning Ke shook his head and said, you should have looked more closely. The students of the Revelation Institute took a closer look and saw clearly what this token represented. Everyone fell into a state of shock and silence. They did not know what to do with the divine hall swords in their hands. Lu Chenjie also saw the waist token clearly. Her gaze turned cold. Is there anyone who wants to kill me now? Ning Ke looked at the students of the Revelation Institute around him and said sincerely, if no one wants to kill me, then I'll leave first. The meeting that the Divine Hall has called should have started. I don't have much time to waste. Then he looked at Lu Chenjie and said with a smile, I have a few words to say to you. First, if the difference between a small character and a big character is not their character, but their background, sect, or family, then I'm not a small character. Second, you don't have the ability to make me wish I was dead. I think even the 3 great gods of the Divine Hall don't have the ability to make me wish I was dead. So I hope that when we meet again in the future, Your Highness, you don't have to say so much nonsense. Finally, there's no perfect person in the world. Of course I'm not. Your partner Prince Longqing isn't either. At least in front of me, he probably doesn't have the confidence to say such words. With that, Ning Ke mounted the big black horse, lifted the reins and galloped toward the camp. Before he mounted the horse, he stepped on the 7-petal blue lotus that was scattered on the ground. No one knew if it was intentional or not. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 233. Looking at the big black horse galloping away, many herdsmen and palace soldiers chased after it excitedly. The students of the Revelation Institute remained silent on the meadow. Many of them had already guessed Ning Ke's true identity. Thinking of the matter that had been the talk of the cultivation world since spring, they could not help but worry about Princess Chenjia's feelings. Princess Chenjia's fiancé was Prince Longqing. The godlike man's life had been smooth sailing. Neither the elders of the Lank Temple or the headmaster of the Revelation Institute could break his perfect exterior and exterior. He had only lost once in the academy in the south of Chang'an. Although not many people knew what had happened that time, a loss was a loss. Today was probably the first time Lu Chenjia had seen the man who had defeated her fiancé. The students of the Revelation Institute were worried that she would be upset. They did not dare to look at her in case she felt embarrassed or angry. They could only lower their heads and pretend to look at the ground of the wilderness. There were 7-petal blue lotuses scattered on the meadow. It was a mess. Lu Chenjia's beautiful face did not show any embarrassment, but her usually calm heart was in a mess. She took out an expensive silk handkerchief from the snow saddle and walked to the broken flower pots. She carefully wrapped the blue lotuses that were about to wither and turn black from the cold wind. Then, she carried it in her arms and mounted the horse, walking towards her tent. A disciple of the Revelation Institute behind her mustered up the courage to remind her. Your Highness, the Divine Hall has called for a meeting today to summarize the matters of the frontier fortress for the past few months. We also need to discuss the plan to deal with the desolate man next year. This is a serious matter. You should go and take a look. Lu Chenjia lifted the reins lightly. She did not care about the voice behind her, nor did she care about the meeting called for by the Divine Hall. She only looked at the big black horse in the distance, thinking about many things. When the news of the opening of the 2nd floor of the academy spread in spring, she had been silently paying attention and praying. She hoped that her partner would get what he wanted and enter the back of the mountain to become the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. However, she did not expect such a proud, confident, and powerful man who seemed to never be defeated to actually be defeated. After that, Prince Longqing returned to West Hill. Although the two had never discussed the matter of the 2nd floor of the academy, she could clearly feel that the current Longqing was slightly different from before. He was still proud and confident, radiating a dazzling brilliance, but there was something unnatural in that pride and confidence, and there was a very faint shadow in the brilliance. Lu Chenjia knew how all of this had happened. It was all because of Ning Quebec. Failure was not terrible. For people like Prince Longqing and her, they had accurately understood the relationship between failure and success when they first learned cultivation at a very young age. However, Longqing's state was profound and his Taoist heart was clear. He was only one step away from entering the knowing destiny state. Ning Ke, on the other hand, had just learned cultivation. His strength was weak and his state was shallow. One could imagine the blow to a cultivator's state of mind if he failed on such a basis. When it came to love, one would be happy because of the other person's happiness and sadness, and forget about the happiness and sadness of the outside world. As for the person who had defeated Longqing and entered the back of the mountain of the academy, she certainly did not like him and even felt enmity towards him. If not for the fact that Longqing had to remove the barrier of his Taoist heart himself, she might have even secretly gone to Chang and then humiliated him. Other than enmity and dislike, she could not help but be curious. No one, including her, would think that the headmaster of the academy would be biased when choosing a disciple, and that the academy would use any shameful tricks. Then, why did the person called Ning Ke gain more attention than Long Qing? What kind of person was that person? She had finally seen that person today, and she also knew what kind of person he was. She believed that she would never forget Ning Ke's despicable look when he threw the flowers and taunted her. Because of this, her memories of the academy became unforgettable. She was ashamed and angry, but also emotional. Holding the reins tightly, the flower addict looked at the big black horse that was about to enter the meeting tent of the Divine Hall. She thought silently and doubtfully, would the disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy all be as shameless as this person? The countries in the Central Plains were ordered by the Divine Hall to help the Yan Kingdom against the barbarians. The Tang Kingdom and the Yan Kingdom were located in the north, so they sent a large number of cavalries, while the other countries and sects sent their young cultivators to obey the order. Now that the coalition army and the palace had reached an agreement, the forces of all countries would naturally gather together to discuss what to do in the future. The convener was undoubtedly the Divine Hall. The left king's palace had spent a lot of manpower and resources to set up a very large meeting tent for the bigwigs of the Divine Hall, showing their sincerity. The tent had a radius of 100 paces and was made of bamboo and wood. The tent was bright and spacious, and even if it could accommodate more than 100 people, it would not seem crowded. The priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall was the most distinguished person present, so he naturally sat in the middle. Xu Cheng, the general of the Tang Empire, sat close to his right, while the seat on his left was empty. The generals of the Yan Kingdom, the disciples of the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom, the monks of the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom, and the disciples of the small vassal countries and sects sat below according to their respective seats. The seats of the students of the Revelation Institute were still empty. Mo Shanshan, the calligraphy addict, and the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had already sat opposite those empty seats. The seats of the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were close to the camp of the Tang Empire, which was higher than that of the South Jin Kingdom and Yueluan Kingdom. Originally, the Great River Kingdom was weak and should not be treated with such courtesy. However, Mo Shanshan was too famous for the calligraphy addict. Except for a few people in the tent, no one was qualified to sit above her, so the Divine Hall made this arrangement. The discussion had not yet entered the main topic when an old woman with white hair and wrinkled skin, wearing a beggar-like garment, walked in slowly with a cane in her hand, coughing from time to time. The priest of the Revelation Department bowed slightly and said with a smile, "Thank you for your hard work, Aunt." Everyone in the tent, including General Xu Cheng of the Tang Empire, stood up and saluted the old woman. This old woman was the sister of the king of the Yueluan Kingdom. Although she had given up the title of eldest princess because she had become a nun for cultivation, she still had the powerful forces of the Buddhism sect hidden behind her. Neither the Divine Hall nor the Tang Empire would slight her. Mo Shanshan did not stand up. She quietly looked at the hem of her white dress, as if she had found some unpleasant dirt there. She did not stand up, so the disciples of the Black Ink Garden behind her naturally did not stand up to salute her. On the contrary, the young girls knew that this old woman was on the meadow that day, so they could not help but show some hatred in their eyes. Everyone was drunk and I was the only one awake. The one who was awake would be the odd one out. Everyone got up and I sat quietly. The one who sat would be the odd one out. Everyone in the courtyard greeted him and bowed like waves, highlighting the Great River Kingdom girls who were sitting quietly. The greetings in the tent gradually quieted down. The atmosphere suddenly became silent and awkward. Aunt Cuny Maddie glanced at the young girls coldly. Looking at these girls who were still fresh and lovely after being blown by the wind and sand of the wilderness for several months, she felt unhappy. Because of their disrespectful and even hostile eyes, she was even angrier. She sat down beside the priest of the Revelation Department and said in a gloomy tone before anyone spoke, "The tribes of the wilderness of the north are inseparable from the devil's doctrine. No one knows how many evil remnants of the devil's doctrine are hiding among the desolate men. Killing the evil is something that we of the righteous must do, so it is not hard to say. However, to deal with the desolate men, the first thing is to unite within the righteous sects and strengthen our own abilities. The old woman looked at the young disciples in the tent and said coldly, "In the past few months of fighting, you young juniors have performed well, but some people have done things in a mess. As a result, they have created a situation that is difficult to clean up and almost ruined the Divine Hall's plan. I think regardless of punishment, you must first learn to reflect on yourself." At this time, most of the people in the tent already knew that the disciples of Black Ink Garden had escorted the provisions here and were ambushed by the horse gang. They thought that Aunt Cuny's words should be referring to this matter. They did not know how the calligraphy addict and the disciples of Black Ink Garden would explain it. As expected, Cuny Maddie's deep-set eyes overflowed with disdain and anger. She said coldly, "In order to repair the wilderness, the Divine Hall decided to send provisions to assist the palace. Now that the provisions have been destroyed, although Chanyu did not say anything and there is no problem with the peace talks, someone has to be responsible for this in the name of Haotian." Hearing this virtuous and respected aunt speak out directly, the crowd could not help but fall silent. Only the sound of long and short breaths could be heard faintly. Many people looked at Imo Shanshan, who had been sitting quietly. Hearing this, the priest of the Revelation Department smiled slightly. He knew that the old woman did not like the Black Ink Garden for some reason and wanted to make a fuss. However, before leaving, the great divine priest of Revelation had told him that the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, was too lonely. If he wanted her to become the pillar of the Divine Hall in the future, she still needed to be polished. So he did not say anything. General Shu Qing came from Chang'an City and did not care about the internal affairs of the Divine Hall. However, the Empire and the Great River Kingdom had always been on good terms. At this time, seeing Cuny Maddie oppressing the girls of the Great River Kingdom, he was a little displeased. He frowned slightly and asked, "What happened?" The priest of the Revelation Department was a man with white hair and beard, but he still looked very young. After thinking for a while, he said gently, "Chinbachi, the commander of the Papal Guardians of the Judicial Department, personally experienced this matter. Let him tell you." These words seemed ordinary and casual, but in fact, it was extremely clever. The Papal Guardians of the Divine Hall were under the command of the two priests of the Judicial Department, and had nothing to do with the Revelation Department. He let the commander come to explain. No matter what the result of the dispute would be, the Revelation Department could still stay out of it and maintain a detached and fair position. Chinbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, looked at the crowd with a solemn face and said, "That day, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were timid and afraid to fight, and let the horse gang break into the camp. The soldiers and civilians of the Yen Kingdom suffered heavy casualties. I saw that things were not right, so I led the troops to take the risk and launch a surprise attack to break the siege of the horse gang." The disciples of the Black Ink Garden looked at each other and felt cold all over. Their clenched fists trembled slightly. They had lived in Mogan Mountain since childhood. How could they know that there was such a shameless person in the world? Cat Girl rushed out with a red face and shouted angrily at the commander of the cavalrymen, "Chinbachi, you are shameless. Thank you for your recommendation votes. Please continue to let me thank you. Tonight, I will start to revise the second volume. That's it. Tomorrow, 6,000 words will be guaranteed at least. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 234. Cat Girl pointed at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and scolded with a red face. The Revelation Department priest's face darkened slightly. Aunt Cuny Maddie's eyes were suddenly filled with anger. She stared at the little girl and said coldly, "You don't have any respect for seniority. How did your master teach you? Is it your turn to speak out?" Zhuo Zhihua took 2 steps forward and pulled Cat Girl back behind her. She bowed to those bigwigs and forcibly suppressed the anger in her heart. She said in a trembling voice, Aunt, this matter is related to the reputation of our black ink garden. Junior brother Sure was buried in the meadow. Can't we talk? Cuny Mattie's wrinkled face showed a trace of disgust. She said gloomily, as a disciple of the master of calligrapher, he couldn't even defeat the horse gang. He deserved to die because he was not as good as others. For hundreds of years, the Ueluan Kingdom and the Great River Kingdom had been incompatible because of the dispute in the Tianmu forest. No one knew how many big and small wars had taken place between the two sides. It could be called a blood feud for generations. The Ueluan Kingdom had a vast territory and was a place where Buddhism flourished. Its strength was far above the Great River Kingdom. Especially in recent years, the relationship between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Ueluan royal family was getting better and better. If the Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom were not close, the monk army of the Ueluan Kingdom might have already set foot on the territory of the Great River Kingdom. As the sister of the king of Ueluan Kingdom, Cuny Mattie certainly hated the people of the Great River Kingdom. She was involved in the coercion at the Yen camp over the past few months, the snatching of the hot spring, and the difficult task of transporting provisions. Therefore, she was not polite to the disciples of Black Ink Garden and spoke harshly and overbearingly. Since the disciples of the Black Ink Garden left the Mogan Mountain of the Great River Kingdom and came to the frontier fortress of the north of Yen Kingdom, they had been constantly enduring the humiliation and frame-up from the Ueluan Kingdom. Now in the tribe of the Palace of the Wilderness, in the meeting convened by the Divine Hall, they did not feel ashamed at all. They even spoke rudely to the dead fellow disciples. Even if the girls were gentle, they could not control their anger and stood up one after another. With the clear sound of swords swinging, more than a dozen slender swords were aimed at Aunt Cuny Mattie. At this moment, they had already forgotten how noble this old lady was. Under the wide tent, the monks from the Ueluan Kingdom's White Tower Temple saw the disciples of the Black Ink Garden dared to draw their swords. They stood up angrily and wanted to rush to Aunt Cuny Mattie to protect her. Cuny Mattie raised her old arm to indicate to the sadhus. Cuny Mattie raised her swords in their hands and looked at the kingdom's girls of the disciples of the kingdom's eyes. How could the Great River Kingdom girls be allowed to act recklessly in the meeting convened by the Divine Hall? Instead, the aunt cold-bloodedly hoped that the girls would be blinded by hatred. Once they really dared to use their swords against her, both the people of the Divine Hall and the cultivators from other countries would deal with them harshly. More importantly, even the Tang general who had been silent all the time would not be able to intervene. Zhua her and held and looked Chu, and looked back. Many people, like her, looked at that place. Mo Shanshan, the calligraphy addict, was still sitting quietly in the chair. She didn't seem to hear Cuny Mattie's insult to her sect. She didn't seem to have any opinion on what happened on the meadow and felt nothing. She looked down at her pure white dress and seemed to regard the stain as a lotus flower. Because of her silence, the atmosphere in the tent became more and more tense. No one knew whether the kingdom's girls would draw their swords out of shame and anger, which would lead to uncontrollable consequences. The priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall, who was sitting in the first seat, looked more and more gloomy. A few drops of dew seemed to condense between his white eyebrows. This bigwig had enough reasons to be dissatisfied with Cuny Mattie and the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. For example, they didn't respect him. But thinking of the relationship between the judicial department and the Ueluan Kingdom, he didn't say a word. The invisible string in the air became tighter and tighter. The sarcasm and contempt in the wrinkles on Cuny Mattie's face became more and more obvious. If the situation went on like this, the Great River Kingdom's girls would still be humiliated. But if the Great River Kingdom's girls dared to despise the majesty of the Divine Hall and fight by themselves, no one knew what kind of miserable end they would face. The headmaster of the academy once said that the more you argue, the clearer the truth will be. No matter what the truth of the horse gang's robbery is, you should always listen to the opinions of both sides. You little girls should talk nicely. Why did you pull out the sword from the scabbard? Don't you know that Aunt Cuny Mattie is so straightforward? These words contained a hint of mockery of Cuny Mattie's behavior and manner of talking. It vaguely showed that she was partial to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. Everyone in the tent could not help but be in an uproar. However, the person who said this was General Shu Qing of the Tang Empire. So neither the priest of the Divine Hall nor Cuny Mattie herself could question it. Cuny Mattie snorted coldly. She looked back at General Shu and said in a cold voice, "I'd like to see what they can say." Zhuo Zhihua was gentle and had the ability of a deacon. She took this opportunity to reprimand her junior sisters to step back. Then she took a few steps forward, bowed with hands folded in front, and carefully told what happened on the meadow that day. The same story, told by different people, had the same ending, but the process was completely different. In the words of Chenbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom were a group of incompetent and cowardly good-for-nothings, which led to the destruction of the provisions and the heavy casualties of the soldiers and civilians of the Yan Kingdom. In Zhuo Zhihua's story, the commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow were cold-blooded and selfish. They clearly saw their fellow righteous people in a desperate situation, but they refused to help. Only when the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were about to win the bloody battle did they rush down to snatch the military merits. Zhuo Zhihua was careful not to mention Aunt Cuny Mattie, flower addict Lu Chenjia, and people of the White Tower Temple of the Revelation Institute. However, everyone present knew why the cavalrymen of Divine Hall entered the wilderness. Their faces changed slightly. The cultivators of the South Jin Kingdom and the Tang army subconsciously glanced at Cuny Mattie with a somewhat complicated expression. Everyone somewhat believed that the story of the Black Ink Garden disciples was true, because these girls were unreasonable. In order to shirk their responsibilities, they had offended the Divine Hall and the Yueluan Kingdom. Their provisions had been destroyed, so they should not be punished too harshly. However, who knew what kind of trouble there would be if they offended these bigwigs? Belief was the human heart, but there was no such thing as the will of the people in the world. What was important was evidence. Besides evidence, there was also strength. The stronger the strength and background, the more powerful the words of the person. The Great River Kingdom was small and weak. Although there was a master of calligrapher in the Black Ink Garden, he was just a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. How could he compete with the Divine Hall and the Yueluan Kingdom? Cuny Mattie coldly stared at Zhuo Zhihua, who had finished her story and retreated. After a moment of silence, she suddenly laughed in a very strange and hoarse voice, looking particularly gloomy. "I was also on the meadow that day. According to what you said, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not join the battle in time. Isn't it also my responsibility? Aren't you saying that I'm also cold-blooded and selfish?" Zhuo Zhihua looked up at her quietly with her eyes full of determination, and said, "I didn't know that you were also on the meadow at that time. As for whether you had anything to do with the cavalrymen of Divine Hall's failure to rescue in time, I naturally don't know. Whether I'm responsible or cold-blooded, it's up to you, Aunt." There was an uproar in the field. No one thought that this female disciple of the Black Ink Garden had the courage to directly point at Cuny Mattie. Some people faintly admired her courage. Cuny Mattie stared at Zhuo Zhihua and shouted angrily, "What a bunch of nonsense! In order to shirk your responsibilities, you dare to confuse right and wrong and frame the Divine Hall and me. I, your aunt, love the younger generation, wanted to let you go and punish you a little bit. I didn't expect that you were so evil. Then don't blame me for teaching you a lesson on behalf of your master." Cat Girl stared at her and said without showing weakness, "You're so old and you're still lying. You're shameless." Cuny Mattie was so angry that she laughed. She sat back in the chair and said nothing, just waiting for the final result. The priest of the Revelation Department was silent. He gently stroked the snow-white hair on the top of his head and sighed faintly in the bottom of his heart. He was a little unhappy with the old woman beside him, but he had no way to deal with her. In the previous dispute between the two sides, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were very moderate in their accusations. They only targeted the cavalrymen of the judicial department and did not involve Cuny Madi and the people of the White Tower Temple of the Revelation Institute. However, this old woman actually jumped into it on her own initiative. She was using her old face to force the Divine Hall to express its position. If he later decided to favor the Black Ink Garden, it meant that he believed the words of the girls and admitted that the highly respected Aunt Cuny Madi was afraid of death and even had the malicious intention of killing people with a borrowed knife. The West Hill Divine Palace and the Buddhism sect had a close relationship. The unknown place behind them had been communicating with each other for thousands of years. Although they respected Taoism, they supported each other. In the secular world, the Divine Hall needed the loyalty and offerings of the Yueluan Kingdom's royal family. Not to mention that both sides could only narrate what happened that day without any evidence. Even if the disciples of the Black Ink Garden produced evidence and the priest was willing to punish the cavalrymen of the judicial department for the sake of superficial justice, at this moment, in order to save the old face of Aunt Cuny Madi, he could only choose to believe the words of the commander. The hatred between the Yueluan Kingdom and the Great River Kingdom has accumulated so much. After a moment of silence, the priest of the Revelation Department looked at the crowd and said calmly, "The peace agreement between the Central Plains and the palace has been reached. Although the batch of provisions was destroyed, it is not a big deal. I will punish the disciples of the Black Ink Garden to copy the scriptures of light 3 times. However, in the previous dispute, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden accused the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall of being untruthful and disrespectful to the elders. You should sincerely apologize to Aunt." After finishing his sentence, he looked back at the Tang army sitting on the right side. General Xu Cheng was silent for a moment. He felt that such a light punishment was a rare kindness from the Divine Hall. After nodding, he looked at the girls of the Great River Kingdom and comforted them gently. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden are not afraid of writing. Aunt Cuny Madi's face was still gloomy. It was obvious that she was very dissatisfied with the priest of the Revelation Department. But she was also clear about the dark dispute between the 3 departments of the Divine Hall. She knew that the matter involved the cavalrymen of the Judicial Department and the Revelation Department would not be too partial. So she remained silent and looked up indifferently, waiting for the apology. Listening to the priest of the Revelation Department's final decision, the monks of the White Tower Temple did not know what to think. But the disciples of the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom all thought that the Tang people and the Great River Kingdom were close. If the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were bullied too much, it would probably lead to more disputes. Now that the people of the Tang camp expressed their satisfaction, they were relieved. No one cared about the feelings of the girls of the Great River Kingdom. They stood alone in the corner of the tent, still holding the show sword in their hands, but their eyes were full of anger and confusion. They knew in advance that it was impossible for the Divine Hall to deal with it fairly, because the apologetic Divine Army was originally the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. But they did not expect that the Divine Hall would deal with it in such a way. The priest of the Revelation Department's decision was very gentle in everyone's eyes. However, these girls from the south were gentle and firm. What they cared about was not the gentleness, but the reversal of black and white behind it. So they were angry. However, in the face of the bright and majestic Divine Hall, in the face of the whole cultivation world, and in the face of the reality that everyone in the tent breathed a sigh of relief, what could they do? Did they really have to bow their heads and apologize to the old woman? So they were confused. All the disciples of the Black Ink Garden, including Zhuo Zhihua, turned their heads and looked at Mo Shanshan, who was sitting quietly in the chair. Mo Shanshan slowly rose to her feet. There was not a single trace of emotion on her elegant and indifferent face. Her thin, red lips were pursed into a straight line, making her look particularly unyielding. It formed a sharp contrast with her soft, black hair. Her dress flowed down like water. She stood in the water and looked at the bigwigs above. She shook her head and said calmly, "Priest, I don't accept this result." At this time, many people were watching her and wanted to know what she would say. According to the rumored temperament of the calligraphy addict, people were not very worried. However, They did not expect that the rumored calligraphy addict seemed to be vaguely different from the real calligraphy addict in front of them. Her response was so simple and stern. There was no emotional debate or angry accusation. From the beginning of the meeting, she had been silent until the divine hall came out with the final result. Then she said softly, "I don't accept it." Since she didn't accept it, then it was as if nothing had happened. The expression of the priest of the Revelation Department changed slightly. He leaned forward slightly and looked at Mo Shanshan, who was not far away. His white hair and beard slowly released a coercion. He had been waiting for the calligraphy addict to show her attitude, but she had not shown it before. At this time, when all parties came out with the result, she made her statement. He could only think that it was a provocation to the dignity of the divine hall. "Hill Master, I have always respected you. I really want to know what your attitude is." Mo Shanshan looked at the priest calmly and bowed slightly. She said, "My attitude is that I don't accept it. Neither I nor my master will accept the unfair result. Why mention the master of calligrapher? Even if he is here today, I will say the same." Cuny Maddie stared at her white cheeks coldly and asked in a gloomy tone, "Hill Master, you have the guts not to accept the result of the divine hall. Do you think that the divine hall and I, an old woman, have been unfair?" The saying, "Age is more ruthless than death," described this aunt. She was an extremely honorable senior cultivator, but today she had forced the room for conversation into nothingness twice. Her gloomy words were like a cold sword stabbing directly into the other's heart. Everyone present knew the elegant and dull temperament of the calligraphy addict. Although her previous performance had surprised everyone, they thought that Aunt Cuny Maddie had thrown the divine hall in front of her at this time, so she should remain silent. However, today the calligraphy addict surprised everyone again. Mo Shanshan looked at the old woman expressionlessly and said calmly, "You have always been unfair." Countless sounds of people sucking in cold breaths rang out in the tent. The priest of the Revelation Department looked at her quietly and said, "Hill Master, if there is no evidence, you can't accuse the divine hall of being unfair. I don't want to send a letter to Mogan Mountain. Please be careful." Mo Shanshan's sparse eyelashes trembled slightly. Her eyes were unfocused, as if she was looking into the distance. She said, "What I don't understand is why what I and my fellow disciples of the Black Ink Garden say is not evidence, then why is what they say the evidence?" There was silence in the tent. The calligraphy addict's words directly pointed out the most fundamental problem of today's matter. However, whether words could be used as evidence had nothing to do with the degree of credibility. It was only related to who the speaker was. The effect of the words of a rich man and a beggar in the court was always different. This was the way of the world. What could they do? Cuny Maddie suddenly laughed hoarsely and old. When the laughter gradually subsided, she looked at Mo Shanshan not far away and said with pride, contempt and sarcasm, "Who in the world will believe that I, Cuny Maddie, will also tell a lie?" It was not who would believe, but who dared to believe. After a moment of silence, the priest of the Revelation Department looked at the disciples of various countries and asked, "Does anyone know where the horse gang came from? Did any disciples of other sects pass through the meadow that day?" No one answered, because there were indeed no other cultivators passing through the meadow that day. As for the horse gang, there might be some lucky ones who escaped, but how could they find them in the vast wilderness? In the quiet meeting tent, Mo Shanshan bowed her head and looked at the tips of her shoes poking out from under her skirt. She was silent for a long time, thinking about what someone had said to her in the carriage, about the tiger and the rabbit, and the tiger and the tiger. "I can accept the punishment from the Divine Hall, but the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall said that the disciples of the Black Ink Garden are muddle-headed and incompetent, cowardly and afraid to fight, and even dare not to fight against the horse gang. I can't accept it. I have been thinking about how to prove my courage and ability." She flicked her fingertips and pulled out a tiny saber from the waist of Zhuozhihua. She looked at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall named Shenbachi expressionlessly and said, "Although you are also a cultivator of the see-through realm, I will not be bored enough to challenge you, because you are not qualified, so you don't have to worry." Mo Shanshan turned her eyes slightly and fell on Cuny Maddie's ugly old face, which was like a paddy field after a drought. She calmly said, I am Mo Shanshan, a disciple of the Black Ink Garden. Aunt, please enlighten me. As soon as she finished speaking, she put the small saber across her palm, with the blade facing down. She exerted force on her wrist and was ready to cut it open. Wait! The priest of the Revelation Department and General Shu of the Tang Kingdom were shocked and stood up to stop her. The Great River Kingdom was deeply influenced by the Tang Kingdom. Even if it was a duel, it was customary to follow the rules of Chang and City. Cutting sleeves was an invitation to a duel, and cutting palms was a duel to the death. The reaction of the people in the tent was a little slower than that of the two bigwigs. After a while, they understood the intention of her action and stood up in shock. There was a sound of chairs and stools collapsing. Mo Shanshan had issued an invitation to a duel to the death to Aunt Cuny Maddie. As everyone knew, Mo Shanshan was one of the most famous 3 addicts in the world among the younger generation of cultivators. She was a master at the upper see-through state. However, the so-called 3 addicts were not only related to the state of cultivation, but also to the appearance of the 3 women. But the person she was going to challenge today was Aunt Cuny Maddie, a powerhouse of the Buddhism sect who had been famous for a long time. Although she was the calligraphy addict, no one was optimistic that she could defeat a predecessor who had decades of cultivation. Therefore, everyone felt that the calligraphy addict looked particularly beautiful today because of her willpower. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Cuny Maddie looked at the junior coldly. She held the armrest of the chair with her skinny old tree-like hand and slowly stood up. The priest of the Revelation Department looked at Mo Shanshan and reprimanded her angrily. What are you doing? Put away your saber quickly. Mo Shanshan seemed to have not heard what he said at all. She held the hilt of the saber with her right hand slightly. There was chaos outside the tent. It was extremely noisy. When the tent curtain was lifted and Ning Ke walked in with the big black horse, he saw Mo Shanshan holding the knife horizontally in her palm. He was so shocked that he did not care that there were so many people in the tent. He shouted angrily, What are you doing? Put away your saber quickly. Mo Shanshan looked at him in the distance and slowly put down the knife in her hand. She said softly, Apart from this, I can't think of any other way to wash away the injustice of my dead comrade. Because he is already dead and will not speak again. And it seems that no one will listen to what I say. There was no expression on her face. She was so calm that it seemed that she was talking about a trivial family matter. However, in Ning Ke's eyes, the girl standing there alone was obviously so fragile and sad. Only he could see her fragile and sad. Everyone in the tent followed Mo Shanshan's gaze to the tent curtain. They looked at Ning Ke with curiosity and surprise. The Revelation priest could not stop the calligraphy addict, but this person said exactly the same words as the priest, and the calligraphy addict obediently put away her saber. Then, people in the tent noticed the trust in the calligraphy addict's calm eyes. They noticed the dependence hidden in the eyes of the Great River Kingdom girls that suddenly brightened. Only then did they realize that they seemed to be used to placing their hopes on this young man. They could not help but feel more confused. When people saw the big black horse in his hand, they were even more shocked and speechless when they thought of the scene on the horse race road yesterday. They all thought to themselves, who on earth is this young man? Last night, I did not finish the revision of this volume. I will continue today and tomorrow. Also, I have to say in advance that the first chapter of this volume has been revised. But the words at the end of the chapter are more important, including the advertisement of Futian. So I will not touch them for the time being. When this volume is finished, I will replace them together. Also, there is no rest this Saturday. Don't forget, last notice, the first place in the weekly list is very dangerous. Don't forget to vote for the recommendation. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 235. Cat Girl rushed over and repeated what had happened in the tent in detail. Especially when she mentioned Cuny Maddie's words, the little girl was even more furious. Everyone in the tent silently watched the conversation between Ning K and Cat Girl. Because they did not know the specific identity of the young man, they remained silent for the time being. They were very curious about what would happen next. Now that the priest of the Revelation Department had come to a conclusion, and Aunt Cuny Maddie's expression was gloomy, would there be any change? Many people of the palace tribe followed the big black horse to the tent. It was noisy until the steward of the Divine Hall, who was responsible for maintaining order, went out to reprimand them. Then it gradually quieted down. Ning K knew what had happened from Cat Girl's narration. After a moment of silence, he put the reins of the big black horse on the tobacco pipe at the entrance of the tent, but did not tie it tightly. He looked at Mo Shanshan in the distance and said, "So that's what happened. Is it worth for you to cut your palm? There must be other ways to prove it." Everyone in the tent was still silent. They looked at him with some curiosity and some mockery. They thought that although there was no evidence, the matter of meeting the horse gang on the meadow was not about evidence. How could he prove it? These thoughts and feelings were hidden in the hearts of the people, but Cat Girl asked directly. Thinking of the anger and helplessness of her senior sisters, she looked at Ning K with her big bright eyes and asked confusedly, "How can you prove it?" Ning K replied seriously, "I can prove it because I was there." He glanced at the disciples of various sects of the Central Plains in the tent with different expressions, raised his right hand to point at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall in the distance, and said, "I can prove that the cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow did not help us and just looked on coldly. After we beat back the horse gang, the commander led the cavalrymen to rush down the meadow, cut off the heads of the horse gang, and snatched the military merits. And I think he even had the idea of killing us at that time." Hearing this, there was an uproar in the tent. The young man not only pointed out that the cavalryman of Divine Hall was despicable and cold-blooded, but also made a more serious accusation of killing us. The uproar, like the wind blowing through the pine forest, gradually subsided. People looked at Ning K with more complicated and weird eyes, thinking that the Divine Hall should believe his words. No one believed that he could turn the situation around. They all felt that he was courting death by accusing the Divine Hall. The face of the priest of the Revelation Department darkened slightly. His silver-like hair was as taut as iron, and he looked unhappy. He didn't expect that the calligraphy addict would be so tough when this farce was about to come to an end. Moreover, this young man who came out of nowhere was trying to make things more troublesome for him. Just as he was about to reprimand him, he noticed from the corner of his eyes that the expression of the great Tang General Shu on his right was somewhat strange. This strange expression came from the smile on the general's face, a smile with a deeper meaning. The priest of the Revelation Department was slightly shocked, wondering if the general of the Tang Empire knew this person. The West Hill Divine Palace illuminated the world and enjoyed a high status. However, they still maintained vigilance and uneasiness towards the Tang Empire's imperial cavalry, which was also respect. Seeing General Shu reveal such an expression, the priest frowned and did not speak. Chen Bachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, was accused of being cold-blooded and selfish, not helping the allies, and even trying to kill people to keep their mouths shut after robbing the military merits. His face was already as gloomy as the wet clouds in Min Mountain. He stared at Ning K fiercely at the tent curtain. Although he didn't think that this person was the dark shadow behind the wall of fire under the meadow, he noticed his clothes and angrily rebuked, "Judging from your clothes, you should be a disciple of the Black Ink Garden. In that case, how are you qualified to accuse me of this matter?" Ning K shook his head and said, "I am not a disciple of the Black Ink Garden." After saying this, he took Cat Girl's hand and walked into the tent. His leather boots stepped on the thick carpet, making no sound, and his footsteps seemed so stable. The disciples of various sects who were looking at him on both sides of the road looked more and more dignified. They thought that this person admitted that he was not a disciple of the Black Ink Garden, so where did his calmness come from? The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall's eyes lit up and glanced at Aunt Cuny Matty. Since Ning Kei appeared in the tent, Cuny Matty had been indifferent and silent. She didn't even look at him, because she didn't care about these small fries. Until she felt the gaze of the commander of the cavalrymen, she slowly raised her head and looked at Ning Kei, who was walking towards her. She said in a cold voice, "Since you are not a disciple of the Black Ink Garden, why did you appear in the camp of the grain team that day? Why did you wear the clothes of the Black Ink Garden? I don't know what kind of heterodox doctrine you are. How dare you pretend to be a righteous person? Take him down and ask him carefully." This was the real confidence brought by the status and strength. Aunt Cuny Matty, a powerful person who could summon wind and rain, wouldn't spend any time debating and negotiating with the opponent. She directly hit him with a stick. Even if she didn't beat him to death, she would knock him out. Even if she wanted to wrongly accuse him, she would do it openly. What else could she say? Hearing the words of Aunt Cuny Matty, the disciples of other sects in the tent were still a little hesitant. However, the sadhus from the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom had already stood up with their staffs and were ready to subdue and take down this young man. Mo Shanshan slightly frowned. Before she gave the order, the girls of the Great River Kingdom behind her exclaimed and were about to stop the monks of the White Tower Temple with their swords in their hands. The situation was in chaos. At this moment, a monk of the White Tower Temple saw Ning Kei's face clearly. He was suddenly shocked and reached out to stop his senior brother beside him. He hurried to Cuny Matty and said a few words in a low voice. This monk was the one who was ordered by his master to ask for the ownership of the hot spring. He hurt Zhuo Zhihua and beat Cat Girl, but was finally seriously injured by Ning Kei's sword and arrow. He had a deep impression of the encounter that day. Ning Kei didn't wear a mask that day. How could he not recognize him when they met again today? Cuny Matty heard that this young man turned out to be a student of the academy. Her deep-set eyes suddenly shone and the wrinkles on her face seemed to be blown away by the wind. She stared at Ning Kei and said in a hoarse and fierce voice, "It turns out that you are a student of the academy. How dare you be so arrogant and presumptuous? Do you think that I don't dare to teach you a lesson?" Ning Kei had already walked to the front and let Cat Girl go back to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. He looked at the old woman and frowned. He shook his head and said, "I just want to prove something for the people of the Black Ink Garden. Why do you teach me a lesson? Do you think you are my teacher? Or are you afraid that I will tell the truth? What are you afraid of?" The 4 questions in a row were not aggressive, but calm and gentle. But thinking that the 4 questions were aimed at Aunt Cuny Matty, who was eccentric and gloomy and had an extremely high status, the people present could naturally feel the hidden toughness in it. They could not help but be shocked and thought that even if he was a student of the academy who came to the wilderness for practice, his behavior was too presumptuous. Cuny Matty was expressionless and looked at Ning Kei coldly, as if she was looking at a dead man. Although it seemed that she was not angry because of his words, those who really knew this aunt knew that she was extremely furious at this time. "I don't know which instructor in the academy your teacher is, but I think it's not impossible for me to teach you a lesson given my seniority and status. As for the truth, I really want to know what evidence you can bring out." Cuny Matty's voice was hoarse and unpleasant, but with a harsh contempt and mockery. Ning Kei smiled and said, "My words are the evidence." The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall was furious and snapped, "What a joke. Since when can a person's words be used as evidence?" Ning Kei was not angry and replied softly, "I heard that what this old lady said was used as evidence by everyone. Then why can't my words be used as evidence?" There was an uproar again and again. This time, it was not because of the toughness shown by the academy student, but because of the title, Old Lady. He clearly knew the identity of Aunt Cuny Matty, but he used this kind of domestic language to address her. What he showed was not only toughness, but also undisguised contempt. Old Lady? Cuny Matty had never been addressed like this in her life. Whether it was the king of Yueluan Kingdom or the 3 great divine priests of the Divine Hall, they were all polite to her. She did not expect that she would be humiliated by a junior like this today. She was so angry that she trembled all over. Her old hands tightly grasped the back of the chair, and it seemed that she would stand up and fight at any time. If she had not known that Ning Ke was a student of the academy, maybe Ning Ke would have been dead at this time. But even if Ning Ke was a student of the academy, she did not intend to show any respect to the Tang Empire and must teach this guy a lesson. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall could not bear it anymore and flew into a rage. He slammed the table beside him and angrily rebuked, "Aunt is the sister of the king of Yueluan Kingdom, Vedanta of the Buddhism sect. Who do you think you are? How dare you be compared with Aunt?" Ning Ke walked to the girls of the Great River Kingdom and smiled slightly, indicating that the worried girls should not panic. Then he nodded to Mo Shanshan to tell her to leave everything to him. Suddenly, the smile on his face disappeared and he slammed the table beside him into two halves. He lectured, "Who do you think you are? How dare you speak to me in this tone?" At this time, people in the tent already knew that this young man was a bold guy. Even Aunt Cuny Maddie was called an old lady by him. Naturally, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall was nothing in his eyes. Although people were still shocked, they did not make an uproar anymore. They silently and coldly watched the development of the situation. It was silent. At this time, if a cat walked on the thick carpet, it would attract everyone's attention. Ning Ke tidied up the front of his clothes and was ready to take out the Elm ID token on his waist. But he was a little hesitant. What kind of action should he take out and what kind of expression should he show? Pride or disdain? It was always very difficult to take out a card beautifully and freely, whether it was the card in the hand or the ID token. The government runner took out the ID token and pointed it at the robber and said calmly, "I'm a messenger." The robber panicked and gave up. The god of gamblers took out the card at the bottom and said with a smile, "No more, no less. I'm just a little bigger than you." The opponent sitting across the long table turned pale and fell to the ground the next moment, clutching his chest. As long as one took out the card in a natural and unrestrained manner, no matter the action, expression or tone, they must be very well coordinated. In this way, it would not seem that you were bullying others. Instead, you would be calm and arrogant to the extreme, but you would not smell any anger. Among all the people Ning Ke knew in his life, there were countless people who were as arrogant as him. But only second brother was so arrogant that he admired him so much and was so arrogant that he was hopelessly handsome. In his mind, if second brother took out the ID token at this time, he would definitely shock a lot of powerhouses and charm a lot of girls. No, second senior brother didn't need to take out his waist tag. The wooden club on second senior brother's head was an excellent waist tag. With second brother's warning in front of him, Ning Ke paid great attention to his demeanor when representing the back mountain of the academy for the first time. He had already regretted taking out the ID token casually on the meadow, and now he was even more uncertain. Holding it in the air like a torch? It was a clear display, but it would be a little stupid. Drawing it out like drawing a knife? It was indeed handsome, but what if people did not see clearly what was written on the ID token and misunderstood that he was going to fight? Although he had gotten rid of the mentality of a nobody and was not afraid of the aunt of the Divine Hall, if they really had a fight, that old woman could kill him with one finger. At this time, the atmosphere was tense and depressing, as Silent Hill. Everyone looked at Ning Ke and noticed that his expression was a little weird, as if he was thinking about some very complicated problems. But they did not know that the problems he was thinking about had nothing to do with anything in the field, and were purely about other people's business. General Xu Cheng had been staring at Ning Ke since he entered the tent. This general from the military ministry of Chang, and had already guessed Ning Ke's identity. At this time, looking at Ning Ke's expression, he thought that it was indeed a little inappropriate to ask Ning Ke to introduce himself in such a place like the back mountain of the academy. So he coughed slightly and said with a smile, "Mr. 13, since you are not a disciple of the Black Ink Garden, should you sit beside me?" General Xu Jun's voice attracted everyone's attention. Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He did not expect that this general had already known his identity. But then he felt a lot more relaxed. He nodded to Mo Shanshan beside him and walked over as he was told. Let me introduce him to you. General Shu Qing stood up and gently held Ning Kei's shoulder. He first nodded to the priest of the Revelation Department and then looked at the people in the tent. He said with a calm smile, "This is the most famous calligrapher of the Tang Empire in the Tianqi year. He is deeply loved by His Majesty. At the same time, he is also the successor of the West Hill Great Divine Priest Yen Sei. But what I want you to know is that he is Ning Kei, who defeated Prince Long Qing in the competition on the second floor of the academy this year." Ning Kei folded his hands and bowed to the people with a gentle expression. It was quiet in the tent. All the emotions had not had time to ferment and erupt, but everyone looked at Ning Kei with endless shock and admiration. The priest of the Revelation Department smiled without saying anything and looked at Ning Kei with great interest. He had already guessed something before, and now his guess was confirmed. He was still shocked, but he did not show it on the surface. In this silence, Ning Kei looked at Aunt Cuny Matty, who looked more and more gloomy, and said, "I heard that you once said, 'Who in the world would believe that you would lie?'" After a pause, he turned to the people in the tent and asked with a smile, "Then I really want to know, who in the world would believe that a student of the second floor of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy would lie?" No one dared to answer, whether in the field, in the tent, or in the world. I suddenly realized that this seems to be the first time since Fan Xian that I have written with strong colors. It seems that I like it. Su Lu had never written with his father, only with his fists. After Ning Kei succeeded in writing with his father these 2 days, he also began to write with his fists. Why am I so ambitious? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the revised version, revised in 201202250329, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 236. I have revised the last chapter and it should be more detailed. This chapter is on Saturday. Because I have to go out during the day, I stayed up all night to write it. I will send it on time. I wish everyone a good weekend. Just like the silence after Cuny Matty asked this question, it was not that no one did not believe what Ning Kei said, but that no one dared to not believe what Ning Kei said. The reason was also simple. It was not because Ning Kei had a noble and holy reputation, but because he was ranked 13th in the back of the mountain of the academy and had a teacher called the headmaster. For people in the world, the West Hill Divine Palace was naturally the most sacred and solemn place, and the academy in the southern suburbs of Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Empire, was the most noble place. The Tang Empire's cavalry looked down on the world and the domestic politics and people were harmonious. A large part of the reason was that most of the imperial court and commandery officials were educated in the academy. An ordinary academy was already a giant, let alone the legendary second floor of the academy. The core disciples of the headmaster lived on the second floor. They rarely walked in the world and gradually became legendary figures. But when they appeared, they could be as weak as nobles and ministers. They could even stand up to the leaders of various sects and even the bigwigs of the Divine Hall. Who would have the courage to jump out and question such figures? Mo Shanshan once said to her fellow disciples at the hot spring by the blue sea that a false reputation was the most powerless thing. Strength always came from strength itself, just like ink and brush always came from ink and brush. So today in the tent when arguing about the horse gang in the meadow, people's real feelings were biased towards the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. She was also famous, but standing opposite her was the Divine Hall and the Yueluan Kingdom, so no one believed or dared to believe it. At this time, the person who said the same words was Ning Quebec. Behind him stood the two unattainable peaks, the headmaster of the academy and the Tang Empire. So at this time, the most powerful person in the tent was him. Exclamations finally broke out. The people in the tent looked at Ning Kei and were so shocked that they didn't know what to say. They could only forcibly suppress their exclamations and exclamations. Then, all the sounds disappeared again. The tent returned to its previous state of silence, except for the sound of rapid breathing. For the cultivators of various sects, Ning Ke was definitely not an unfamiliar name, although he seemed to have directly entered the beautiful cultivation world of primordial qi in an unexpected manner this spring. Under the instruction of the great divine priest of the judicial department, the divine hall had been promoting his name. Therefore, all the followers of Haotian in the world soon knew that there was a man named Ning Ke who had helped another legendary powerhouse kill a monk of the Yueluan kingdom and a sword master of the South Jin kingdom in one night at the Spring Breeze Pavilion in Chang'an City. Everyone in the world knew that this person named Ning Ke had defeated the dazzling and perfect Prince Long Qing in the competition on the second floor of the academy. What was even more shocking was that everyone knew that the name Ning Ke had appeared in the hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. Although no one had read the Tomes of Arcane and many people had doubts about it, since the news was spread with the approval of the Westhill Divine Palace, it should not be false. He had just entered the second floor of the academy, become the successor of the Divine Talisman Master, and was qualified to write his name in the Tomes of Arcane. How could the young cultivators of various sects in the tent not be shocked, in awe and in envy with such a shocking experience? Perhaps it was because of the old incident at the Spring Breeze Pavilion and the dead people in the old incident, but the eyes of the disciples of the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom and the monks of the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom were filled with awe and envy, as well as some hostility. The most shocked people were actually the disciples of the Black Ink Garden. Cat Girl blushed slightly and stared at Ning Ke blankly. Her bright eyes were full of joy and disbelief. The girls covered their mouths tightly to prevent themselves from screaming out of shock. They had thought that Ning Ke was just an ordinary student of the academy. They did not expect that he was the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Thinking of the time when they met in the hot spring and fought side by side in the wilderness, they could not believe their ears. When Mo Shanshan heard the name, she looked at Ning Ke with a slightly stagnant look. Her hands, which were as steady as Shushan, trembled a little. There was still no expression on her dull and slightly round cheeks, but a bit of fatigue suddenly appeared between her eyebrows. She put the small saber in her hand back to Zhuo Jihua's waist and sat back in the chair silently. Her lazy and listless eyes looked a little lost, and she did not look at Ning Ke again. Ning Ke did not notice the subtle change in the girl's mood at this time. After sitting down beside General Shu Qing, he did not say anything more and just looked at the Revelation Department priest quietly. Because he did not look at Cuny Matty again, the noble aunt's expression became gloomier and gloomier. The Revelation Department priest also did not look at Cuny Matty. He looked at the snow-white silver hair floating in front of him and suddenly smiled. He quickly made a decision and looked at Ning Ke and said, "Mr. 13, how do you think this matter should be dealt with?" Ning Ke was slightly stunned when he heard the name Mr. 13. He thought that the bigwig of the Divine Hall had already known his identity in the frontier fortress of the north of Yen Kingdom. Then he thought of another thing and understood why. Once upon a time, there was a mountain, and there was an academy in the mountain. There was a headmaster in the academy, and he was the tallest person in the world. Perhaps this was just a saying to the people in the mortal world, but for the big shots in the cultivation world, especially those who knew a lot of historical secrets like the priest of the Divine Hall, it was an unquestionable truth. The headmaster of the academy was tall, of course, did not mean that he was tall. Although he was tall, it did not only refer to his high level of moral essays and ideology, but also to his high seniority. According to the childhood memories of the Haotian hierarch lord and the elder of Lank Temple, the headmaster of the academy had lived for at least 100 years. According to the headmaster of the academy's self-deprecating words, the longer one lived, the more advantage one would have, such as seniority. Therefore, there was no one in the world who was of the same generation as the headmaster of the academy. Even those who were of the same generation as the headmaster of the academy's disciples were believed to have died. Therefore, when Master Yen Sei talked with second brother Jun Amo at the back of the mountain of the academy, there was a dispute over seniority. Therefore, when the bigwigs in the Divine Hall and the Buddhism sect mentioned those people at the back of the mountain of the academy, they never referred to them according to the seniority of the orthodox sections. The academy itself had this problem. The seniority gap between the front yard and the back of the mountain was too big. In order to avoid the indescribable embarrassment, it formed a habit of addressing them. The instructors of the front yard called those at the back of the mountain according to the order of seniority, such as Mr. First and Mr. Second. This habit gradually spread to the outside of the academy, but because the people at the back of the mountain basically did not show up in the world, probably only the bigwigs in the Divine Hall still remembered this rule. Therefore, Ning Ke was Mr. 13. No matter in the military camp or in the world of cultivation powerhouses. Ning Ke was not a typical Tangs, but he had been in the army since childhood. Although he was no longer a small soldier in the border town, he still retained a lot of the aura in this aspect. What he hated most in his life was the bastards who did not help their comrades and robbed military merits. In the Dongxing Stockade village, he knew that the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had robbed the military merits of the Blue Water Battalion. After entering the wilderness and experiencing the bloody battle, he did not have the slightest good impression of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Since they were Mr. 13, it was inevitable that he would have a 13th temperament. Therefore, even though he knew what answer the priest of the Revelation Department wanted to hear, he still did not follow the other party's instructions. The priest of the Revelation Department fell into silence. As an important figure in the Divine Hall, he naturally should protect the people in the Divine Hall. However, in recent years, the Judicial Department had two famous people, the Tao Addict and Long Qing, and its strength had rapidly expanded. In addition, the Light Department had to keep a low profile because of the secret matter, so the Judicial Department was extremely arrogant from top to bottom. As the priest of the Revelation Department, he had long been dissatisfied. Today, Ning Ke dared to guarantee the Academy's reputation as the Divine Hall, so he took advantage of the situation to protect the Divine Hall's bright and fair reputation. He was not afraid of being criticized for damaging the dignity of the Divine Hall, nor did he care about being blamed by the Tao Addict and other people. With his mind set, he looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, Chenbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, received 40 sticks and reported to the great divine priest of the Judicial Department to remove all of his positions. The cavalryman will return to the Peach Mountain and be punished with hard labor for half a year. What do you think? This punishment did not include Cuny Matty, the flower addict and the students of the Revelation Institute. But it was natural, even the priest of the Revelation Department could not make any decision. Ning Ke knew that it was impossible to ask for more, so he nodded gently. Of course, he did not forget to praise the bright and righteous side of the Divine Hall. At this time, he was not reserved like a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. General Shu Qing gently stroked his beard and also agreed. So this matter came to a final conclusion. During the discussion, no one asked for Cuny Matty's opinion. Cuny Matty, who was sitting next to the Revelation Department, had a gloomy face. Her dry hands holding the chair were trembling. Of course, she was not afraid of anything, but she was almost unable to suppress the anger in her heart. Hearing 40 sticks, Chenbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, instantly turned pale. The stick was a special punishment instrument inside the Divine Hall. It was made of black pine wood and wrapped with fine steel thorns. It was said that countless years ago, the first great divine priest of judgment carried this stick for 20 years before he understood the meaning of Haotian. As a subordinate of the Judicial Department, he certainly knew this legend and how much pain this stick would bring to people. In the past few years, he had followed Prince Long Qing to patrol around, arresting the remnants of the devil's doctrine and heretics. He had personally whipped those evildoers with the stick. He had seen the blood blooming on their backs and the vines entwined with tendons. He had never thought that such a thing would happen to him one day. He was a master in the see-through realm and had an important position in the Judicial Department. However, the hierarchy of the Divine Hall was strict. Since the priest of the Revelation Department had made a decision, he did not dare to resist. He did not even dare to argue or protest. He could only clench his teeth tightly and obediently let the steward of the divine hall drag him out. Cultivators in the see-through realm were very powerful, but their bodies were no different from those of ordinary people. Soon after the heavy muffled sound outside the tent, Chinbachi, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, finally could not help but let out a miserable howl. He wanted to clench his teeth and not cry out. He did not want to disgrace the judicial department. However, under the stick of the judicial department, even if he clenched his teeth, he could not resist the sharp pain. Everyone in the tent couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines as they listened to the muffled thuds of the cane landing heavily on their backs. They listened to the miserable howls, and could even faintly hear the hissing sound of the thin steel wires hooking out of their flesh. Listening to these voices, the girls of the Great River Kingdom pursed their lips tightly. Thinking of their younger brother who died under the meadow, they finally felt a little better after many days of depression. They could not help but look at Ning Ke, who was not far away, their eyes full of gratitude. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 237. After Chinbachi was carried back from outside the tent, no one dared to believe that he was the previous commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall with a solemn expression and the blessing of light. It seemed that whether it was the emperor or the saint, as long as they were stripped naked and had countless pieces of flesh torn off from their backs by the thorn cane, they could only be miserable criminals. The priest of the Revelation Department glanced at the badly mutilated body on the carpet. His expression did not change at all. He spoke calmly and sternly. The main meaning was, of course, to reiterate the teachings of the Divine Hall. He warned everyone that Haotian's fair eyes were always patrolling the world, and those who dared to violate it would be punished. Ning Ke did not listen to him carefully. It was not that he had any bad feelings for this bigwig of the Divine Hall, or that he wanted to express his strong contempt for hypocrisy. In his opinion, sometimes hypocrisy was also a virtue. The reason why he could not concentrate was that the man lying miserably on the carpet was staring at him. Chinbachi, who was bleeding like a river and his muscles were strands, raised his head with difficulty. He stared at Ning Ke's eyes with his gray eyes without blinking. There was no emotion in his eyes, only indifference. However, it was this indifference that deeply showed his hatred for Ning Ke at this time. As the commander of the Divine Hall's apologetic divine army and a powerhouse in the see-through realm, he had never been humiliated like this. He knew that he was not qualified to hate the academy, and it was even more impossible for him to take revenge on the other party. But at the same time, he believed that the two priests in the judicial department, especially Prince Long Qing, would definitely stand up for him in the future. Therefore, even though he was already in a daze from the pain and his eyes were a little blurred, he still stared at Ning Ke because he wanted to remember this face and this person clearly. The matter of the horse gang on the meadow had been declared over with the severe punishment of the commander by the Divine Hall. Therefore, even if Chinbachi stared at Ning Ke could not do anything. Ning Ke could not be like those gangsters in the west city of Chang and beat someone up just because the other party stared at him. However, Ning Ke was not afraid of anything. He knew the hidden meaning in the indifferent eyes of the bloody man on the ground. So he slowly squatted down and stared back at him without hesitation. He said, "Commander, the way you stare at me makes me feel as if your eyes are piercing through me. It's a pity that you can't kill with just your gaze. You have to know that we were in the camp at that time, and we were the ones anxiously waiting for you on the meadow." Suddenly, he remembered that Master Yen Sei once described the real grand cultivators to him. For example, second brother only needed to glance at you and you would die. Then he thought that he had to rely on the waist token and the reputation of the academy and the headmaster of the academy to bully others. He could only rely on his power but could not rise to power. He could not help but feel a little resentful. No one could sense Ning Ke's resentful mood at this time. On the contrary, many people in the tent were resentful because of his appearance. Especially when they saw the miserable situation of the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall covered in blood and rotten flesh. Ning Kai still lowered his body to continue to mock him. In the eyes of the disciples of various sects, he, a guy with fresh eyebrows and ordinary and amiable expression, was indescribably abominable. He was purely a scum who bullied others with his power. Aunt Cuny Mattie could no longer suppress the anger in her heart. She slammed the arm of the chair heavily and snapped, "Enough." Ning Kai stood up and looked at Cuny Mattie. He shook his head and said with a smile, "Not enough." There was a tense silence in the tent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the young man with cute dimples on his cheeks when he smiled. They wished they could take a pair of scissors and pierce through his dimples. They thought that the Divine Hall had punished their subordinates and they all remained silent. Wasn't that enough? When I walked into the tent, I stopped Hillmaster from challenging you to a life-and-death fight. It was a little rash to interrupt. The reason why I did so was that I thought you were old and weak. If Hillmaster made a mistake and hurt you, it would inevitably cause gossip. But I didn't think it was wrong for her to do so. Ning Kai looked at the cold expression on the old woman's wrinkled face and the anger and contempt in her eyes. He thought of the scenes he had seen after he came to the frontier fortress of the north of Yen Kingdom. He thought of the despicable and shameless old woman who bullied others, framed others, and used her power and prestige to force the girls of the Great River Kingdom into danger. He frowned and said, "I just think we should ask first." When the grain team camp was besieged by the horse gang, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not move. "Aunt, you were also on the meadow at that time. Did you know that? If you knew, why didn't you do anything at that time?" Without waiting for his voice to spread, he quickly continued to ask. It was the Divine Hall who was punishing its subordinates. "Aunt, you said enough. Can you also interfere in the affairs of the Divine Hall? If you can, why didn't you do anything on the meadow that day?" Ning Kai stared at Cuny Mattie's old and slightly muddy eyes. His tone was extremely serious. Of course, he was not joking. His puzzled expression seemed gentle and his words were neither fast nor slow, but his meaning was very tough. Aunt Cuny Mattie trembled with anger. She did not expect that after Commander Chinbachi had paid such a bloody price, this new disciple of the Academy's back mountain would completely disregard the seniority of the elders and even want to teach her a lesson. The priest of the Revelation Department frowned slightly. In his view, even if Ning Kai was the core disciple of the headmaster of Academy and might represent the attitude of the Academy's back mountain, the Divine Hall had already expressed its harmony with the humiliation and blood of a powerhouse. If Ning Kai really wanted to spread the flames of war to Aunt Cuny Mattie, it was something that the Divine Hall would never allow. The relationship between the Taoist power and the royal power of the Yueluan Kingdom, Aunt Cuny Mattie's seniority and status in the cultivation world, and the power of the Buddhism sect behind her, meant that the Divine Hall had to protect her dignity. Therefore, the priest casually glanced in the direction of the Sword Garret of South Jin Kingdom. Both the headmaster of Academy and the students of the second floor of the Academy rarely walked around the world. But today, the cultivation sects in the world still held the Academy in great reverence. Because there were many legends that began to circulate a long time ago. These legends were passed down from generation to generation in sects of various countries and formed a certain way of thinking. In addition to the beauty of distance, it was easy to produce a sense of awe. The world had not seen the headmaster of Academy or the back mountain for a long time, and it had become increasingly mysterious and profound. Now they finally saw a disciple of the second floor of the Academy. But it was not surprising. He could not summon the wind when he opened his mouth and could not summon the rain when he raised his hand. Instead, he was extremely proud and mean. The respect caused by the mysterious and profound naturally faded. Especially the sword masters of South Jin Kingdom. They had the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, who was recognized as the strongest in the world. They were extremely proud and knew that this person called Ning Kai was the culprit who killed a senior brother last year. It was more appropriate to say that they hated him rather than respect. Of course, the Revelation Department priest's glance did not mean that the Sword Master of South Jin Kingdom would jump out and kill Ning Quebec. The Sword Master of South Jin Kingdom would not do such a stupid thing. One only needed to think about the legend of Peach Mountain being cut empty to know that even if the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, was here in person, he would not offend the Academy for no reason. A Sword Master of South Jin Kingdom said in a low voice, "Mr. 13, you are not a member of the Divine Hall. What right do you have to care about the Divine Hall's affairs?" The priest's gaze and the Sword Master of South Jin Kingdom had no respect for Ning Ke, only hatred. These factors combined into a question and rebuttal. Of course, under the premise that no one in the tent dared to question the Academy, this was considered brave. This sentence was naturally aimed at Ning Ke's words to Aunt Cuny Maddie. Ning Ke glanced at the Sword Master of South Jin Kingdom and shook his head, saying, "Are you an idiot?" As soon as the words came out of his mouth, he was stunned. Sang Sang had once asked him if he thought that everyone except himself was an idiot. He said that was because there were always many idiots doing idiotic things in the world. His favorite thing to do was to call countless people idiots in front of Sang Sang, such as the Tang Princess. He had once eavesdropped on the Tang Emperor calling people idiots in the imperial study, and he felt the warmth of a kindred spirit. He used to call Chen Pippi idiots on the letter paper, and he never got tired of it. It was just that, when he began to cultivate in the back mountain and gradually walked on the road to becoming a bigwig, he rarely had such a direct and straightforward way of doing things. That was why at this time he felt very familiar and missed the idiot ruler that he had not seen for a long time. He looked at the Sword Master of South Jin Kingdom and smiled. He continued in a gentle voice, "Are you an idiot? My master, Master Yen Sei, is the great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace. He is on an equal footing with the three great divine priests of Revelation, Light, and Judgment. As his only successor, if I don't do anything when I see someone tarnishing the Divine Hall's reputation, wouldn't I disappoint my master's earnest teachings and let Haotian down?" At this time, most people would probably turn around and ask the Revelation Department priest, "Your Excellency, do you think I should do anything?" However, Ning Ke did not ask, because he knew that being arrogant and taking advantage of others was not a mistake. However, being too arrogant and taking advantage of others would only cause him more trouble. At present, the Revelation Department priest was obviously on an equal footing. He had been hunting in Min Mountain for many years, and he knew very well what to do when he encountered tigers and bears. Why would he do anything unnecessary? The Sword Master of South Jin Kingdom, who was full of courage and perseverance, was casually blocked by Ning Ke's words. No one in the field questioned whether he was qualified to care about the affairs of the Divine Hall. Although the whole world knew that the West Hill Divine Palace's confirmation of the two great divine priests of the South School of Haotian Taoism was only based on political considerations, if they questioned this matter at this time, wouldn't it be a slap in the face of the West Hill Divine Palace? Aunt Cuny Maddie's face was extremely dark. She stared at Ning Ke's eyes, and her body trembled slightly. Suddenly, she laughed hoarsely and unpleasantly, and said sternly, "A woman does not serve two husbands, but a disciple has two masters. I won't ask Yen Sei, but if I meet the headmaster in the future, I will ask him what he is thinking. Is he going to ruin his century-old reputation for such a naughty, despicable, and shameless disciple?" Although he did not say it explicitly, the hidden meaning in his words was directed at the two masters. Although Ning Ke had not seen the headmaster of the academy, he had lived in the mountains for so many years. How could he allow anyone to be so presumptuous? Moreover, he knew that he could not punish this shameless old woman today. He was dissatisfied, but he could not do anything to her. He did not expect that she would come to him at this time. How could he not give her a hard kick? Ning Ke's smile slowly disappeared, and he said calmly, "Previously, you asked who my master was, and said that you would teach me a lesson on behalf of my master. Now that you know who my master is, it seems that you still want to teach him a lesson." He slammed the table beside him heavily, and the table toppled over. The teacups were shaken away, and the tea splashed all over the sky. Ning Ke pointed at Cuny Maddie's nose, and his expression changed rapidly. He said angrily, "According to seniority, you, old woman, should call me martial uncle. How dare you teach me a lesson? Do you know what it means to respect the younger generation? Are you going to ask the headmaster? Is the headmaster someone like you can see whenever you want? You want to teach the headmaster a lesson? Do you want to deceive your master and destroy your ancestors?" When the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall stared at Ning Kai, he thought that this was the biggest humiliation he had ever suffered in his life. At this time, Cuny Matty pointed at Ning Kai with a trembling finger, thinking that this was the humiliation she had never suffered in her life. However, just like the quiet court at this time, it only took the old woman a very short time to realize that there was no way for her to get back this humiliation today, because Ning Kai did not reason with her at all. Ning Kai was unreasonable. He only cared about seniority. As the sister of the Ueluan Kingdom's king, Cuny Matty was extremely powerful, and her seniority in the Buddhism sect was indeed very high. In the past decades, whenever she met people who were weaker than her, she would use her strength to suppress them. When she met people who were more powerful, she would use her seniority to suppress them. In addition, everyone had to give her some face, so she was successful in every endeavor and gradually developed such a temperament. To put it in a good way, she abhorred evil, but in fact, she was arrogant, cold, and narrow-minded. She never thought that someone would use this kind of means to deal with her, and she could only listen obediently, because according to her usual speech and behavior, the other party did not do anything wrong. The seniority of the headmaster of the academy was indeed very high. Even she, the old woman with the highest seniority in the Buddhism sect, was only 2 generations lower than him. This also meant that if strictly required, she really had to respectfully call Ning Kai uncle. She humiliated her uncle and questioned the grandmaster. This seemed to be no different from deceiving the grandmaster and destroying the grandmaster's ancestors. Cuny Matty was so angry that she was a little out of her mind. Vaguely, she seemed to see those peers who were suppressed by her seniority and dared not to raise their heads no matter how she scolded them. She thought to herself, "Am I going to suffer the same humiliation today?" She stared at Ning Kai, and her skinny old hands hanging outside her sleeves trembled violently. There was a strong fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth in the tent. Ning Kai looked up at her condescendingly, with his hands behind his back calmly. There was no fluctuation of aura in his body. He did not need to say anything, and his meaning was clear. Hit me, hit me. Do you dare to kill me? If you really lost your mind and dare to hit me in front of so many people, I don't need to use eldest brother and second brother to kill you. I only need to send the 12th brother, Chin Pippi, to take a look at you and beat you up. Well, it's because your respected aunt has not yet entered the knowing destiny state. Ning Kai looked at her and shook his head. He sighed and said, "As a mighty person in the Buddhism sect, you don't even know how thin your life is. No wonder you are so old and have not entered the knowing destiny state until today." Although Cuny Matty was a member of the royal family, she was persistent in cultivation, noble in status, high in seniority, and powerful in strength. The most painful thing in her life was that she could not cross the high threshold. Under the continuous stimulation, she was about to lose her temper and was on the verge of exploding. But she knew that she could not fight with Ning Kai here, so she had been forcibly suppressing it. But she still heard such a sentence at the end. Aunt Cuny Matty forcibly swallowed back the blood that was about to gush out of her dry lips. She used the last of her consciousness to make herself blacked out. No one knew whether it was true or not, and then she fell backward. There was an exclamation in the tent. Requesting recommendation votes on Monday. Please support me. Last week, I have been the first in the weekly recommendation. I hope I can continue to enjoy this comfort this week. Thank you very much. I can't repay you, so I will blow you a kiss. Mua, mua. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to cast recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 238. Whether it was true or not, Aunt Cuny Mattie was not feeling well and had to be helped out of the tent by the disciples. As for whether it was the occasional cold or the anger attacking her heart, one could guess it from the eyes of the monks from the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom. Ning Ke looked at the weak back of the old woman without any sympathy. He thought to himself, even I have not seen the teacher. How dare you accuse the headmaster of the academy? What kind of fool are you? Thinking of the fool, he rolled his eyes and suddenly had the absurd idea of putting the big black umbrella on top of his head. He secretly thought that it seemed to make him more like second brother. Today's arrogance came from second brother's teachings. So although it was absurd, it was natural for him to have this association. From the legendary youngest uncle to second brother, senior brothers and sisters, and now Ning Ke, the puppets of the academy were proud and arrogant. The people in the tent were shocked and angry before, but when they thought of the stories that had been circulating for a long time, they had to be silent. The academy had the right to be arrogant. If they were weak, they would be bullied even if they were not arrogant. If they were strong enough, no matter how arrogant they were, no one would dare to do anything to them, just like Cuny Mattie. Because of these things that happened before, the agenda of the meeting became much simpler. Ning Ke did not listen very carefully. When he reacted, the meeting in the divine hall had ended and most of the people in the tent had left. The priest of the revelation department smiled and went to rest. General Shu Cheng looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, although I also know it is good to stay with fresh girls, since our army has a camp here and you have revealed your identity, do you still want to go to the barracks of the Black Ink Garden? It is not good for the imperial court. Look at what you said. Of course I will go with you. Ning Ke was a little embarrassed by the general's teasing. He knew that in many people's eyes, there was something wrong with him, a disciple of the second floor of the academy, to disguise himself and follow a group of girls from the Great River Kingdom all the way north into the wilderness. The female disciples of the Black Ink Garden were still surprised. They wanted to come forward to talk to Ning Ke, but thinking of his real identity, they did not dare to do so. Ning Ke smiled at the girls and was about to say something. Unexpectedly, Mo Shanshan stood up silently and walked out of the tent without saying a word. He could not help but be stunned. Zhuo Zhihua sighed in her heart and smiled apologetically to Ning Quebec. She pulled Cat Girl, who was eager to move forward, and bowed to the Tang army with her junior sisters. Then she followed Mo Shanshan out. Ning Ke couldn't help but touch his head, wondering what was wrong with the calligraphy addict. The Tang camp was quiet and the patrolling soldiers looked serious. Under the escort of several guards, Ning Ke and General Shu Cheng walked slowly. No one dared to disturb them. The slightly cold winter wind blew the military flag above the camp. Ning Ke looked up and couldn't help but think of his life at the frontier fortress of the city of Wei. He missed it so much and was about to sigh with emotion. Unexpectedly, General Shu Cheng looked back at him with a faint smile and said meaningfully, "The calligraphy addict is a good woman." Ning Ke knew that the general had indeed thought wrongly. He could not help but smile bitterly and was ready to defend himself. General Shu Cheng shook his head and smiled, "Mr. 13, you don't have to say anything more. It is appropriate for the calligraphy addict to be a disciple of the back of the mountain of the academy. The Tang Empire and the Great River Kingdom have been on good terms for generations. I believe that both the academy and His Majesty will be very satisfied with this marriage." Hearing this, Ning Ke suddenly understood why the general and the previous revelation priest looked so gentle when they said goodbye, as if they were matchmakers. With his current identity, it was no longer a purely private matter if he wanted to get married. At least he had to go through the imperial court and the academy. However, there were very few female disciples in the world who could match the identity of the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Of course, the calligraphy addict was the best candidate. Ning Ke did not know how to explain. He really admired the woman who was addicted to talisman and stood on the branch in a white robe and blue belt. However, this kind of thing, no matter what it was after all his own business. how could it become a matter for others to discuss? In order to resolve the awkwardness, he changed the topic and said, I thought that the priest would protect the dignity of his divine hall no matter what. I didn't expect that he was fair. The Revelation Department is in charge of the Revelation Institute, but Prince Longqing's experience in the Revelation Institute was not very pleasant. General Xu Qing said, so the relationship between the priest of the Revelation Department and Prince Longqing has always been a bit subtle. Especially in recent years, the Judicial Department has become more and more powerful. Prince Longqing has become famous, and the Revelation Department has been under a lot of pressure. Ning Ke said with emotion, I see. I didn't expect that there would be so much secular strife in a place like the Divine Hall. The Divine Hall shines brightly in the world, but the resources it can control are not infinite. The three great divine priests each lead a side, and of course there is competition among them. However, these three great divine priests are above the great gods, so naturally they can't fight like secular hooligans. The real competition is between the three priests. General Xu Qing continued to explain, among the two bigwigs of the Judicial Department, the Tao addict is obsessed with Taoism and doesn't care about specific affairs. So the divine priests and deacons of the Judicial Department, the apologetic divine army and spies are all specifically managed by Prince Longqing. If the Revelation Department wants to attack the arrogance of the Judicial Department, of course, the first target is Prince Longqing. He looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, in spring, you defeated Prince Longqing. In the eyes of many people in the Divine Hall, it was an unbearable humiliation, but the Revelation Department is probably grateful for your appearance. Ning Ke thought of the silver-haired priest of the Revelation Department and frowned slightly. He said, how old is the priest of the Revelation Department this year? Is he stronger or weaker than Longqing? If he could know this, he could roughly infer the true strength of the young powerhouses of the Divine Hall. The reason why he wanted to know this was that he always liked to see the Academy and the Divine Hall as opposite. The priest of the Revelation Department, Qing Lishua, should be over 30 this year. As for the cultivation state, General Xu Qing shook his head and said, whether it is the military ministry or the Imperial Center administration, they only have a rough estimate of the cultivation state of the people in the Divine Hall. Just like Prince Longqing, it is said that he is only one step away from the knowing destiny state, but no one knows how big that step is. Ning Ke stopped thinking about these issues and looked at a quiet tent in the distance. After a moment of silence, he said, General, there is something I may need your help with. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden stepped on the withered winter grass and walked to their camp. Cat Girl looked at Ning Ke and the Tang General walking into the Tang camp. She reluctantly withdrew her gaze and frowned curiously. Teacher Zhong, no, the way senior brother Ning looked at Aunt Cuny Maddie just now was very strange. I don't know how to describe it. The girls thought of the previous scene. Aunt Cuny Maddie was trembling with anger and her face was dark. It seemed that she would go berserk at any time. But Ning Ke stood in front of her with a gentle smile. He did not avoid her and even looked up at her. They also felt that the temperament and taste that he revealed at that time were somewhat inexplicable. Cat Girl bit her finger and thought for a long time. Suddenly she was enlightened and clapped her little hands excitedly. She looked at her senior sisters and said, I know, senior brother looked really cheap at that time. Hee hee, but I like it. The girls of the Great River Kingdom were collectively stunned. Then they found that the word cheap was indeed the best choice to describe Ning Ke's expression at that time. They could not help but cover their mouths and laugh, saying that they also liked his cheap look at that time. Only Mo Shanshan, who was at the forefront, did not laugh. There was no expression on her silent face. Zhuo Zhihua looked at her expression and gradually stopped smiling, revealing a trace of worry. Back in the tent, Mo Shanshan seemed to have completely forgotten the fierce conflict in the tent and the previous scenes. She calmly poured water, ground the ink in the brush pen, sat in front of the table and began to prepare to write. Zhuo Zhihua waved her sleeves to signal her junior sisters to leave temporarily. She walked to the table and sat down on one knee. She quietly looked at the expression on her white cheeks. After a long time, she softly said, "Why did you leave like that before?" Mo Shanshan's right hand holding the pen slightly stiffened. After a moment of silence, she said, "Then how should I leave?" She was the calligraphy addict, the hill master with the highest status in the black ink garden at the foot of Mogan Mountain. She was also the last core disciple of the master of calligrapher, Lord Wang. But she was not old. In Zhuo Jihua's eyes, she was more like a younger sister who was obsessed with calligraphy and didn't know anything about the world. Zhuo Jihua quietly looked at her and softly said, "Mr. 13 has helped us a lot along the way. If he didn't show up in the tent today, I'm afraid there would be more troubles in the black ink garden. Even if we don't mention the friendship built these days, you should say goodbye to him just to express your gratitude." Mo Shanshan gently turned her wrist and the soft brush pen touched the yellow paper. She wrote a horizontal line and lightly said, "I haven't said it before. In fact, those horse gangs came because of him. In this case, we have no reason to be grateful to him. On the contrary, he dragged us down. It's natural for him to speak in the tent today." Zhuo Jihua looked at the crooked horizontal line on the table and couldn't help laughing. She immediately sighed softly and said, "You know that's not what I want to say." Mo Shanshan looked at the ugly handwriting like earthworms on the paper and felt a little annoyed. She looked back at her and said, "Then what do you want to say?" Zhuo Jihua looked at her dark eyes with a little annoyance and said with a smile, "What I want to say is that since you have secretly liked Mr. Ning for such a long time, now that you see him in person, why don't you make it clear?" Mo Shanshan was slightly stunned. She turned back and continued to write with her head down. She said, "I don't know what nonsense you are talking about." Zhuo Jihua smiled and said no more. She walked out of the tent and left her alone to think. Mo Shanshan didn't think about anything because the thoughts in her mind had become a mess. She just held the brush pen subconsciously and kept writing. Her thin lips were slightly open and she muttered to herself with annoyance, "So you are that guy. But you have been hiding it from me. What do you want me to say? How can I be so cheap?" As she muttered, the girl's eyes occasionally showed shame and annoyance. Her pink cheeks were slightly puffed and blushed. The ink on the yellow paper was dripping but tangled. Even when she was 3 years old, she couldn't write such ugly words. "I had something to do yesterday. I make it up today. There's more. I'm writing slowly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.